Chapter 201 Conqueror's Hockey. Yuhi Herr Shanks, known as the most domineering man in the sea. In addition to his own character and strength, the main source of this name is his conqueror's hockey, which is terrifying to ultimate. That's true, the op world is top of the line. Until the time point before Loya crossed, there was only his conqueror's hockey in the anime, which could affect the entity. There are many people in this world who can awaken Conqueror's Hockey. Green Pepper once said that in the New World, there are many people who have Conqueror's Hockey and the qualifications of kings like Crucian Carp crossing the river. So why did they fail to achieve what Shanks achieved? Even said that many people with Conqueror's Hockey are still miserable in the New World. The answer lies in Conqueror's Hockey itself. Conqueror's Hockey and armament are different from seeing and seeing. It cannot become stronger through training. Only when the person becomes stronger, Conqueror's Hockey's attack power will become stronger. The only difference between Shanks and the average Overlord color owner is his strength. The power of the four emperors makes his Conqueror's Hockey extremely powerful. And unlike the other three, Shanks is the only normal human among the four emperors, who has never eaten a devil fruit and does not need to be distracted by the fruit's ability development. The same thing that weighs a ton hits a person, and cotton and iron are naturally incomparable. Moreover, the reason why the other four emperors did not focus on Conqueror's Hockey, in addition to their own fruit ability, there is a very real problem. That is the effect that Conqueror's Hockey can exert in a battle of the same level. Compared with the armed color and the knowledge color, it is simply weak. After all, it is something that improves with the improvement of strength. It is not a trump card for the weak to defeat the strong, but the power of the strong to subdue the weak, which is the so-called king's power. What else can Conqueror's Hockey do when the strengths of the two sides are infinitely close, or even have both? For the powerhouses of the same level as you, in addition to being vigilant, Conqueror's Hockey might stun them. Combining the above 2 points, people such as Whitebeard will give up specializing in Conqueror's Hockey and focus on the fruit ability. According to common sense, this is indeed the case. But Shanks was the one who broke this theorem. No one knows what he does, but his Conqueror's Hockey is indeed incredibly powerful and can be activated anytime, anywhere. Just standing there, even a strong man of the same level, will be shocked by the domineering arrogance that he exudes all the time. And once he makes a full effort, his domineering is enough to tear the earth apart. This is somewhat similar to Loya's Longway, but it is different. Both can oppress people from the soul to the body, but Longway is more of an attitude of being at the top of the food chain and looking down on all beings. Distant and unreachable, akin to a deity high above. I heard that this little guy can exude an aura that belongs to a dragon. On the island of Crisvia, he shattered a large piece of land with the power of the dragon alone. Shanks seemed to be talking, but also to himself. So, just because of this, some of you think that my Conqueror's Hockey must not be Longway's opponent. Also open a bet. Ah. Beckman patted his forehead and pulled the fat man who had been hiding to the side to eat chicken legs. Look at what you've done yourself. Well, what's the big deal? Lackey Lou continued to chew on his chicken thighs without the slightest bit of self-consciousness. Anyway, the captain won't have anything to do, just take a look. Or, don't you want to know the result? Ah, this is it. Beckman secretly glanced at his own captain who was still talking to himself in front of him. His expression was still calm and indifferent, but the extra anticipation in his eyes could not deceive anyone. One is the legendary creature, the dragon, which belongs to the coercion of the dragon, and the other is the owner of the strongest overlord of human beings. What kind of scene will the two collide? I'm really curious to think about it. At this moment, Shanks, who was standing there quietly, looked at Loya in the sky with a smile, and said word by word. So, give me face and come down. Click. Shanks' words were so light and drizzle, but every time he uttered a word, a thunderous sound exploded in the ears of everyone in the Uhifa pirates. Even major cadres such as Beckman suddenly had the urge to kneel on the ground. Incorporating Conqueror's Hockey into the sound to deter the enemy. Beckman took a deep breath and pulled a faint smile from the corner of his mouth. To be able to do such a thing, as expected of the captain. Another sea-floor stone bullet. Between the muscle agitation, a cone-shaped stone was squeezed out and fell into Loya's palm. The blood hole that was broken was gushing out continuously, but soon, with the help of the return of life, the bleeding stopped. Thinking about Loya is also funny. He forgot such an important thing. Yuhifa is not eagle-eyed. With a big family and a big business, how could he be alone when he goes out, and if he wants to see him, the test that he should have is impossible. The injury this time was also a lesson. The 4 emperors of the New World were too dangerous for him. Even the cadres around the other party could not tolerate him being underestimated. Thinking of this, Loya couldn't help but glance at Jesus Bu. This Jesus cloth, capable of piercing through his body protective ice armor and dragon scales, is indeed the father of God Usopp. If it wasn't for the warning of the dragon's body just now, and let Loya come back to his senses, then the hole in his hand is in his stomach at this moment. Observation hockey simply doesn't work as well as it should. Looking at the group of people next to Hook's corpse below, Loya was about to speak, when suddenly, a huge sense of oppression came directly, making his flapping of his wings pause for a while. "Give me a face, will you come down?" Shanks' calm voice exploded in Loya's ears, and the shock of terror penetrated into his heart, making him extremely uncomfortable. Conqueror's hockey. Loya took a deep breath and immediately recognized where this feeling came from. However, in the face of Shanks' Conqueror's hockey, Loya did not faint for the first time. He bit the tip of his tongue to wake himself up. Whoa! The severe pain made people awake, the 2 dragon wings regained their vitality, and the strong wind brought Loya to fly in the air again. Is that Conqueror's hockey just now? Looking at Shanks, who was looking at him calmly below, Loya had a heart palpitation. It's so scary. In order to avoid the follow-up sniping by Jesus Bu, Loya continued to raise his position, and now he is hundreds of meters above the ground. However, even at this distance, when Shanks' arrogance hit, it still made him feel the illusion of being trapped in a quagmire, and the pressure from all directions made him breathless. What's even more terrifying is that this is definitely not the other party's full strength. Thinking of the scene where Shanks and Whitebeard competed for domineering and tearing the sky apart before the war, Loya was very sure of his guess. Since he wasn't going all out to kill himself, there was only one answer Shanks would do. Shanks, this is to test me. Looking at the one-armed man below, Loya remembered the information that he had spread on the sea, and smiled slightly. It's okay, come and go without being indecent. Since you want to see it, let you feel it. Boom. A heavy drum hit the hearts of Beckman and the others. His face changed quickly, and he raised his head nervously. Is this feeling like Longway? Chapter 202 Facing the 4 Emperors. Almighty Cultivation Supreme. Boom. Click. 2 completely different but equally domineering auras slammed into each other, and there was a shattering sound from the apparently empty air. Looking along the source of the sound, I saw 2 arc-shaped air hoods that seemed to be invisible, colliding violently in midair. Yuhi's black lightning flashed constantly, and every time it sputtered out, it punched a deep black hole in the ground. The dense lightning bolts were connected together, and the sky would be torn apart by this force. While maintaining the explosion of Longway, Luo and Ya slowly lowered the flying height. As he approached, Beckman and others could feel the terrifying dragon might more clearly. It wasn't true that Loya would fall because he gave Yuhi a face. The face fruit was just a joke after all. The real reason is because there is not only nowhere to borrow power in the air, but also distracted flying, which is not good for this momentum competition. Only by standing on the ground can he go all out to fight with Conqueror's hockey of Yuhi Fashanks. After all, the other party's overlord color is too strong. If you don't take out the strength to breastfeed, you won't be able to last for a few seconds at all. This is a feeling that Loya has never felt before. Since he stepped into the second stage more than half a year ago, pressing people with potential is his habitual behavior. Of course he knew that there was a thing called Conqueror's Hockey in the One Piece world, but he didn't expect that the first time he met this thing would be on Yuhi Shanks, one of the 4 emperors. That tyrannical and domineering arrogance forced him to do his best to contend. Boom. Boom. Even though it was just a confrontation of 2 momentums, there was still a loud explosion in the air, and dull thunder continued to sound. The place in front of the 2, whether it was steel or something, was crushed into powder by these 2 forces. Pat. Loya finally landed on the ground, and the first time he stepped on his feet firmly, he quickly mobilized the strength of his whole body and let Longwei burst out without reservation. He is not Shanks' opponent, this is something that Loya has always known. But he also wanted to see how far he could go. What Loya didn't know was that compared to him, Shanks was the most shocking one at the moment. Only he himself understands how strong his overlord is. Even compared with the other 4 emperors, it is not a quantitative difference, but a complete qualitative difference. Even Whitebeard and others will suffer a lot in the face of his overlord oppression, which is enough to prove their power. However, it is this level of tyrannical color. Not only has he failed to win Loya for so long, but even said that the other party is still poised to fight back. Behind Shanks, the members of the Yuhifa pirates were all silent, looking at the 2 of them seriously. Hey, this is too exaggerated, the other party is really just a little guy. Reikalu, who was wearing a small round mirror, couldn't care about the chicken legs in his hands at the moment, and the muscles on his big round face twitched, which was extremely funny. But at this moment, no one would think that his expression was exaggerated and funny, because the shock in their hearts was no less than that of Lakilu. In the face of the collision between Luoya Longwei and Shanks' overlord, they have resisted the urge to escape countless times. This is not simply a difference in strength. If it is really going to be a one-on-one fight, they don't guarantee it, but there is still a 60% chance of winning. But that was the real battle, and it had nothing to do with the current momentum competition. I thought that the title of the 17th Lieutenant General of the Navy was given by the Navy, but I didn't expect. Tisk, it's really a good little guy. By the way, I don't know if there is such a newcomer here in the pirates. What? Beckman's hand was shaking while holding the cigarette. It wasn't fear, it was instinct. In the face of Longwei and Shanks' overlordship, even he could not be calm. In response to his question, Jesus B.U., who was holding the sniper rifle tightly, suddenly remembered something and whispered, "Speaking of newcomers, I remember that Lieutenant General Garp's grandson went to sea not long ago. That little guy should have good strength." Huh. Cap's grandson. Everyone looked back at Jesus Cloth, and then invariably thought of someone who ate their spoils and made the captain pay an arm. Luffy. No, he's still so young. Jesus B.U. shook his head and explained, "It seems to be called Ace. I heard that he was Luffy's righteous brother and grew up with him. Because of this, Carp's paragraph time is running around the world like crazy, trying to get Ace back." What's the result? When everyone heard it, it was quite interesting. The dignified naval hero, Tekken Garp, his grandson went to become a pirate. Did Sengoku's face turn black? Thinking of this, the fire of the 8 trigrams in their hearts was raging, and even the magnificent competition between the 2 over there was put aside. But Jesus Boo's next words disappointed them, only to see him shaking his head. "How do you think I know the news? It's not because the old mad dog Cap is running around on the Great Route. I don't know if Ace finds it or not. But during this time on the Great Route, it was disturbed by Carp. And the object was that Carp, and no one dared to say anything." Cut. It's an anticlimactic. Seeing that there was no surprise, the crowd dispersed in disgust. Ace. Beckman smiled and exhaled a puff of smoke. "I hope it's really what you said, otherwise, this little guy in front of me will be very boring." While Beckman and others were talking a lot, the competition here had already reached a white-hot stage. "Are you ready for the last bet?" Feeling the stronger dragon power on Loya's body, Shanks laughed and burst out with all his strength. "Just let you see the gap between you and me." Hum. With this last hum, the air suddenly shook. Then, All sound disappeared, silent. Not sure how much time has passed, a second, a minute, or an hour. Boom, boom. Crashed. In just an instant, Loya flew out like a cannonball. And in the position where he stood before, a pit with a size of dozens of meters appeared in an instant. Shanks, domineering, dwindles immediately, disappearing before causing more damage, showing great control. It looks like that's it. With one hand on the hilt of the western sword, Shanks said with a relaxed expression and said with a smile. From start to finish, he didn't move a single bit. On the other hand, Loya did everything he could. But unfortunately, the strength gap between the two sides is too great. Even with the passive bonus of Longway, Roja is still unstoppable in the face of Shanks' unreasonable tyranny. Hearing Shanks' words, Jesus B.U. shrugged. Anyway, the other party is also a newcomer. How many years have you been out at sea? Do you want to compare with him? Do you mind? Shanks grimaced at Jesus' cloth, then turned to look at the direction Loya flew out, a little surprised. Huh, you're back so soon, it seems that there's something to be desired. Hearing Shanks' words, everyone looked up. As expected, the Navy rookie, although flying crookedly, still flew over. Pat. Stepping on the gravel with bare feet, the dragon scales on Loya quickly disappeared from bottom to top. Soon, what appeared in front of Shanks and others was not the scaly monster just now, but a flat-headed young man. Pooh. Loya pursed his mouth and spit out a mouthful of saliva mixed with the smell of blood. Then, he smiled and looked at the domineering man in front of him. No wonder he is called the most domineering man, this kind of domineering is really terrible. Saying that, Loya nodded slightly. First meeting, Your Excellency Shanks. Lieutenant Admiral in Lower Admiralty, Christopher Loya. Loya, so young. Looking at the young man who had regained his human appearance, Shanks suddenly had the illusion that he was old. Although he had already entrusted the straw hat to Luffy, he thought he would be a part of the new era. But Luffy is still young, and now he is only a half-year-old child. It is still out of reach to go to sea, let alone lead a new era. So he never thought that this day would come so early. Similar to Shanks, Loya was full of emotion at the moment. It has been almost a year since I came to this world, and I have finally taken this step. From surviving on an isolated island to now facing the 4 emperors, everything is like a dream. Chapter 203 Simon, They Were Caught. First meeting, Your Excellency Shanks. Lieutenant Admiral in Lower Admiralty, Christopher Loya. Face the top powerhouses in the sea. Yuhi, one of the 4 emperors, made Shanks, and Loya's performance was neither humble nor arrogant, calm and relieved. This made Shanks take a high look at him. After all, the two sides are the relationship between the Navy and the pirates. They dared to be so calm in front of him. Should Loya be confident or ignorant? But anyway, Shanks didn't come here to murder a rookie in the Navy. Immediately, he also nodded and said in a deep voice. Christopher Loya, well, I remember your name. With the words of Shanks, once it spreads to the sea, Loya's reputation will skyrocket again. This is the influence of the 4 emperors. After finishing speaking, Shanks looked at Loya with a calm face, and began to doubt life again. Hello. Can you give me some reaction? I said I admit you. Could you be more excited? A little bit of newcomer self-consciousness, okay. I must be a fake 4 emperors. As a friend of Shanks for many years, Beckman, the deputy captain of Yuhifa Pirates and part-time nanny, no mistake, knew what Shanks was thinking when he saw Shanks' expression, and immediately stepped forward and took over the conversation. Then, Mr. Loya, what are you doing here? The 4 emperors are so big. After seeing Shanks say that, he shut up, but Beckman took over. Loya sighed with emotion. On a pirate ship, the captain is the absolute authority, the absolute king, and his status cannot be denied. And as a captain, only those who match their identity can speak to him. Think of Whitebeard when he was at the top of the war, so many people tried to attack him, but were blocked by his sons. The reason is because of that. If you want to face Whitebeard face to face, you have to step over the corpses of those captains. Now, even if he passed Shank's test, he did not have the right to have an equal dialogue with him. Beckman's voice is proof. You see, what is a misunderstanding? This is called a misunderstanding. If Loya knew Shank's true thoughts, it is estimated that Shank's character in his heart would collapse. However, the other party is also the deputy captain of the dignified Uhifa pirates, a well-known powerhouse in the New World, and Loya did not dare to neglect his questioning. Actually, it's nothing. We just came here as soon as we evacuated you. We just came back to see the situation. In other words, why are you on Ian Island before you ask your excellency? Huh, surprised N. Beckman looked at Loya with a bewildered expression, and asked strangely, why? No, don't you care about your companions? We detained the kid from the Weston family. Ah. I must be a fake pirate. You can see that people are not afraid of me. Beckman suddenly had the same feeling that Shanks had just now. Detained. Westons. Simon. Loya shook his head and asked, by the way, should I know something? Well, people don't even know. Looking at Loya, whose expression was dazed and did not look like a fake, at this moment Yuhi made them collectively feel pain. I thought that the other party was detaining Simon and the others because they were here, and came to them to ask for someone. Unexpectedly, the other party did not know such a thing at all. Aren't you a navy that believes in wolf pack tactics? Few people don't know. As soon as he finished speaking, Loya suddenly remembered something. He made a wait gesture to Uhifa and the others, then walked aside to take out the phone bug and dialed the Flying Squirrel's communication. By the way, am I being ignored? Shanks blinked and looked at Loya, who walked to the side, bewildered and dazed. I'm the Four Emperors. I'm so tired. A long way from the town, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel stood on a stone and looked nervously at the direction of the town. The movement from there just now was not small at all, even if it was far apart, he could hear it clearly. In particular, he was very familiar with the two amazing auras. More importantly, these two momentums left him with a lot of bad memories. Should I be happy? Thought the Flying Squirrel. But immediately, he put the idea behind him. No matter how much you want to see Loya be beaten, she will also score occasions. The opponent is Yuhi Fashanks. Can Roha escape? At this time, the vibration of the phone bug woke him up. At this time, who else will call me? Loya. Flying Squirrel quickly dug out the phone bug in his pocket and picked up the receiver. Hello, Loya, you. The Flying Squirrel's words were interrupted by Luo Ya's gloomy voice. Wait a second, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. Can you tell me first, Simon, where are they now? Gollum. This question is a little embarrassing. The phone bug is not as user-friendly as a modern phone, and the speakerphone is always on, so everyone around Loya's voice can hear it. Hearing this sentence, Tony on the side patted his head and sighed. It's over, I'm going to suffer. This time, when Simon and the others were brought out, Zephyr did not agree, and it was for the sake of the dead Hansa to allow Tony to follow. In order to bring Simon and others out, Loya issued a military order, promising to bring them back completely. This is a military order. No matter how many grievances or excuses you have, you will be punished if you don't finish it. There is no reason to escape. Loya said to take them all back, and what happened now? Not one or two, but all of them were arrested. Just listening to the sound, the Flying Squirrel seemed to feel that the temperature around his body began to decrease. However, things are not there yet. Flying Squirrel's expression froze, and he turned on his horse face and shoved the phone bug to Tony with lightning speed. Tell Christopher Loya what you have encountered, make no mistake. After saying that, the Flying Squirrel swayed the righteous cloak behind his back, raised his hand and greeted, the rest of the soldiers, march at full speed. Yes. Dong dong dong. When Tony didn't respond, the Flying Squirrel left directly with the small cannons of the remaining Navy soldiers. Tony was left alone in the dust. This flying skier must be fake. Tony growled inwardly. Oh, it looks like you know Tony, too. Loya's voice came from the phone bug, and Tony shivered in fright. Hey, listen to Loya. I can explain that this is what Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel means, and it has nothing to do with me. At the other end, the ruins of the town, in front of Shanks and the others. The ignored Shanks and the others continued to look at Loya in a daze. At this moment, they saw a large piece of ice rising rapidly from the ground beside Loya. The ice cube gradually deformed as it rose, and soon, a throne formed by ice appeared under Loya's butt. As Shanks' right-hand man, Beckman quickly went through the information in his mind, then smiled meaningfully, and said to Shanks, I heard that this Loya is in the Admiral Aokiji has trained under him, and it seems that is because of this. Quote. How about it, are you interested in trying again? Nothing at all. Shanks waved his hand in disinterest, with an expression like I was already a salted fish. Beckman, do you think I'm a fake 4 emperors? Why are people not afraid of me? Huh. Well, Beckman breathed out a cigarette and smiled. Probably, it's because he knows your character and character. After all, he's the best rookie in the Navy in years, so it's not surprising that Carp and Sengoku will tell him about you. Hey, is that so? Shanks buckled the back of his head embarrassedly. So in their eyes, I'm still a good person. Huh. Beckman exhaled a puff of smoke and looked at the smoke ring slowly dissipating in the air, expressing that he did not want to pay attention to his captain. Chapter 204 Don't Let Luffy Go Out to Sea. It seems that he was directly withdrawn by the flying squirrel and threw the pot back. In the narration, Tony threw the pot back more than once. It was Lord Flying Squirrel who arranged for Simon and the others to go to sea. It was also him who forgot to contact him in the middle of the journey, and he was the one who didn't go looking for them when something went wrong. Anyway, it has nothing to do with me. Everything is the pot of the flying squirrel. But even so, Tony did not forget to emphasize to Loya that Simon and the others really have nothing at all now, as evidenced by life papers. After all, Loya issued a military order. Simon and others really had an accident. After returning, waiting for him is not a good end. And judging from the character of a certain Ice Cube bastard, if he doesn't feel well, the fate of the 2 culprits, he and the flying squirrel, can be imagined. Life paper. After listening to Tony's explanation, Loya was slightly relieved. The other party is not only his own companion, but also a disciple of Zephyr. What happened a few years ago is already a haze that can't be erased in Zephyr's heart. If he loses another batch of disciples, even if it is in his own hands, the relationship between Zephyr and him will not turn against each other, but the ending of old age and death is okay. Expected. The voice of the phone bug was so loud that Loya heard it, and Shanks and others also heard it. At this time, Shanks showed a sly expression and took Beckman's shoulders. Hey, Beckman. Did you hear? That kid issued a military order. So, what do you want to do? For some reason, Beckman suddenly felt helpless from the bottom of his heart. In the face of his own captain, who can tell the difference between the big and the bad, but can be said to be a little bit of a little thing, he has been very tired for a long time. Hey, Shanks said with a wicked smile, although we owe the Weston family's favor, we can't really do anything to them, but it's okay to beat them up. If they were beaten badly, that kid will definitely be scolded when they go back. Sure enough. Beckman held his forehead weakly. Whoosh. At this moment, a sharp ice spear shot out and passed between Shanks and Beckman's heads. Huh. The 2 turned back together, and what they saw were Loya with a weird expression and a good member of his own family who didn't know what to say. Hey, I said. Loya spread her hands and shrugged. Don't treat me as a dead person. That's a little embarrassing. I told the plan directly, but people listened to it. But the 4 emperors are worthy of being the 4 emperors, and their faces are also at the level of the 4 emperors. Shanks let go of his hand nonchalantly and coughed twice. That's right, we have your people in custody. But what will you give in exchange? The topic is changing so fast. Including Beckman, a group of people looked at Shanks in shock. So all of you older generations are like this. Loya sighed. So does Carp, so does Marshal Sengoku, and so do you. Ah, that's a lot of information. Everyone doesn't know how to interface. After speaking, Loya rubbed his temples and began to seriously consider the exchange conditions. Although I don't know why, the dignified Shanks owes the Weston family a favor, but it is a personal friendship and cannot be used in this place. Now the position of both sides is that the other side is a pirate, and they are a navy. If I wanted to rescue my colleagues who had been detained by the other party, I couldn't beat him. Absolutely. It's just an exchange. So the question is, what chips do you take out? Looking back on the original work, the description of Shanks was a little more than when Luffy first went to sea, and then it was basically not updated. For Shanks' understanding, Loya is limited to knowing that the other party is a crew member on the ship of One Piece Gul D. Roger. There is a buddy and opponent named Mihawk, and a buddy and opponent named Bucky. I know a lot of fierce people, and I am also a fierce person. He gave Luffy the hat that Roger gave him, and he was very sure that he would become a pirate, and was bitten by the Lord of the Sea in the East China Sea. Wait, Luffy. Loya raised his head suddenly, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Boom. The magic power broke out again, and Loya burst out the dragon scales again. This action made Yuhi send everyone in the pirates group vigilant, although he was ready to take action. Oh, I don't have enough chips, so are you ready to grab it? Shanks smiled lightly, but his only right hand was holding the hilt of a western sword. If Loya really doesn't know what to do, he doesn't mind beheading him here. What about the rookies in the Navy? What about the close relationship with Qingzi Zepha? The dignified four emperors cannot tolerate repeated provocations. But things didn't develop as he did. Roha shook his head, didn't speak, and flew directly into the sky. At this distance, even if it is Shanks' slash, Roha has enough confidence to avoid it. The explosive speed brought about by the second stage of acceleration is no joke. Now he has already mastered this move that puts a lot of pressure on his body and integrated it into every move he moves. A group of people looked up at him quietly, waiting for him to speak. In midair, Roha flapped his wings and stared at Shanks below. Chip, of course. My chips are, East China Sea, Windmill Town, Monkey D. Luffy. What did you say? In Mu Ran, a strong evil spirit emerged from Shanks. The rest of the people also had a gloomy face, thinking about how to keep the high-altitude Loya. Using Luffy as a bargaining chip, what is this bastard trying to do? Although it wasn't long, they all had great affection for the little guy who kept clamoring to be the Pirate King. Today, he has been threatened by others because of himself and others. It has nothing to do with the name of the four emperors, and they personally do not allow such a thing to happen. This is the dignity of a seaman. In fact, Loya certainly didn't think so. When he saw that Shanks had already pulled out his western sword by 1 centimeter, and seemed to be considering whether he could kill him with one sword, Loya quickly explained, of course not with his life as a bargaining chip, and I'm not stupid. Quote. Hearing this, Shanks was also relieved. It's not that he doesn't believe in Luffy, but after the competition just now, he deeply understands the level of Roha's current strength. Not to mention Luffy, who has not yet gone to sea. Even if he gives Luffy a few years to run around, he may not necessarily be this guy's opponent. But what do I mean by not being stupid? Seeing his captain's expression, Beckman reminded in a low voice. Cap, Dorag. Garp, Vice Admiral of the Navy Headquarters, nicknamed Iron Fist, personally captured, rumored, the naval hero of One Piece Roger, one of the strongest of the older generation. Dorag, the supreme leader of the Silence Army, the most vicious criminal in the world. His strength is unknown, but he is absolutely terrifying. Then, these two people, one is Luffy's grandfather, and the other is Luffy's cheap dad. If Loya dares to kill Luffy, what will happen? Not to mention. Did I get too excited just now? After reacting, Shanks let go of the hilt and smiled awkwardly. But then he turned around. Since the other party didn't threaten Luffy's life, what did he mean? Listening to the conversation below, Loya brushed off the goosebumps on his hand, which was frightened by Shanks' suffocating aura. Then, he looked at Shanks with a sinister smile, and said with a smile, "Didn't you give him all the straw hats? Are you so sure that he will go out to sea and become a pirate? Then the question is, you said that if I let my direct subordinates stroll around Windmill Town, what are the chances of him going to sea? Even if he really goes to sea, but when he comes to the Great Root, I can hunt him down with my own hands. Speaking of which," Loya flicked his wings, "do you think he can escape? So, my bargaining chip is to not interfere when he goes to sea, and promise not to arrest him for 2 years." Loya tilted his head. "What do you think?" Yuhi sensed Shanks. After finishing his chips in one breath, Loya held his hands and looked at Shanks with the victory in hand. On the ground, Shanks and a group of people took a deep breath and looked at Loya in the sky in shock. "Are you the only one who dares to talk to us? You are the most shameless one." Chapter 205 Deal Struck. Almighty Cultivation Supreme. Thank you Rudder Master Heui Shangfeng for the reward. Plus more. The debt is too much to be overwhelmed. Anyway, I still owe 2 chapters, spare time to save the 3 chapters, and the big tree will send it out together one day. It's cool. Dividing line. But although shameless, what Loya said is also a fact. Haven't you seen him fly high? If Shanks doesn't agree, at this height, they really can't do anything to Loya. Moreover, there are some lessons from Ace, and Sengoku and Garp will definitely applaud their full support for blocking Luffy out of the sea. Maybe Garp will even lend his beloved dog-headed warship. Then Luffy really has no chance at all. Shanks looked at Loya in the sky with a little speechlessness, surprised by the shamelessness of the other party. But after a long time, he suddenly burst out laughing. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha. Then, for some unknown reason, the rest of Yuhifa's side also burst out laughing. Loud laughter lingered in the sky over the ruined town for a long time, with the stumps everywhere. It was very strange. What's so funny? Loya looked at them in a daze, not knowing what he said wrong. No, you didn't say anything wrong. Shanks put away the smile on his face. His eyes were a little emotional, and a little relieved. I saw Shanks nodded and said under Loya's surprised eyes, "Very good, then it's settled." Are you serious? Now it was Loya's turn to be restless. You agree? My eloquence in marketing all the year round has not been brought into play, okay. However, it is a good thing to agree, and now it is the top priority to be able to exchange Simon and the others, and the rest of the problems can be put aside for the time being. While speaking, Loya lowered his flying height slightly and asked in shock, "You really agree? Exchange Simon and the others for the chance to fly out to sea?" "Ah, yeah, Pat." Before Shanks finished speaking, Loya took out the phone bug hidden behind his back and hung up in front of him. Through the slowly disappearing purple fur on the top of the phone bug, Shanks knew that the person on the other side of the phone bug was a flying squirrel. Okay, that's all you have to say. Loya grinned and put away the phone bug. To be on the safe side, I recorded this sentence, and Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel will serve as a witness. However, with the prestige of the 4 emperors, you shouldn't even bother to lie to me, a newcomer, right? Shanks. I'm so grumpy. What if I suddenly really want to cut him off? On the other side, the flying squirrel heard the voice from the other end of the phone bug, and was speechless for a long time. When Loya called the phone bug and heard their conversation, the flying squirrel knew what Loya was thinking. It wasn't until Shanks finally agreed that the phone worm ended the call. He suddenly wanted to smoke a cigarette, and said in a sigh, "Society, society." Shanks' face is definitely not good-looking now. It's strange that he doesn't get angry when he encounters such a shameless guy. And he is a top powerhouse who has been famous for a long time in the sea. If this matter spreads out, where does his face go? Although the other party is the Navy, the other party is also a newcomer. As a result, they do not trust you, and they even recorded it as evidence. What confidence do you have to say that mantra in the future? Thinking of this, Flying Squirrel couldn't help but observe 3 seconds of silence for Shanks. However, the Flying Squirrel was a little curious at this time. How did Loya know so much? That little guy named Luffy is nothing but a child, even he has only heard about it. This is the only source of information, or because of what happened to Dorag, he paid a little more attention to it before he knew Akatsuki. What is Carp's identity? Naval hero. Nicknamed Iron Fist, he fought and killed countless enemies in his life. On the sea, there are not 10,000 or 8,000 people who regard him as an enemy of life and death. Thinking about what happened to Zephyr, you can see how confidential Carp will keep his family's information. If it weren't for Drago's attempt to overthrow the world government, the matter would be too much trouble, and the Flying Squirrels would never know who Garp's grandson was from the beginning to the end. However, it is like this, the information that can be called top secret, Loya actually knows it clearly. This made the Flying Squirrel a little confused. To say that Zephyr told him, that is absolutely impossible. With his own experience, Zephyr would not do such a thing. It has nothing to do with trust or not, this is a matter of principle. Perhaps, it was General Aokiji who told him. The Flying Squirrel could only guess at this moment. After the phone bugs were put away, the Flying Squirrel put on a serious expression and watched the soldiers over there beating the ice cubes, like a coal miner. But what they dug was not precious coal, but a pile of crushed ice. Looking at the iceberg in front of him, the Flying Squirrel wanted to tug at Loya's collar and roar, "Is this what you mean by frozen? You are making an iceberg, okay." However, when he thought of the guy who was frozen in the center, the Flying Squirrel didn't feel that Luoya was making too much of a fuss. That kind of monster has to be absolutely foolproof. And although blood marrow worms have only been found on Ian Island, no one can be sure whether these worms have spread to the outside world. The answers to these things, only the former head of the Bibi family, who is frozen in the heart of Yamanaka, could tell them. Thinking of this, the Flying Squirrel took out his sword, looked at it with some distress, and then greeted the soldiers to step back. "It's too slow, let me come." "Lord Flying Squirrel." A group of Navy soldiers looked at him blankly and said, "Moved. Knowing that we can't handle it, you can go straight to it from the beginning." Those who are stationed in the headquarters are most aware of how hard the ice cubes made by the newly promoted Vice Admiral Loya of the Navy are. That's true, pulling one as a sword. Falling back to the ground again, Roha cautiously looked at Shanks, whose face was black to coke. Indeed, the current Shanks will never kill himself. But it's hard to guarantee that the other party won't beat him to get angry. For Loya's distrustful appearance, Shanks' eyelids twitched, and he finally managed to hold back his desire to do it. "What are you afraid of? I'll keep my word, and I won't eat you." No, I know your recipes are not that wide." Loya waved his hands quickly. "I'm just worried that you will beat me. Although I'm a genius and handsome, if you want to beat me, I think I'll still do it. I can't stand it." "So, what does this have to do with looks?" Shanks thought sadly. A few minutes later, after confirming that Shanks would not make a move, Roha was relieved. Coming to the corpse of the giant hook, Loya pressed hard on the incision with his fingers. The pressed position was only slightly resisted for a second, and then a pit was pressed out by Loya's fingers covered with dragon scales. "Oh, what a lot of strength!" Shanks exclaimed with flickering eyes. "Is this thing hard?" He told everyone the answer to this question with the sword energy he just cut out. Even if Hook's solid interior is not as hard as his exterior, being able to press a hole so easily is enough to show how terrifying Loya's strength is. Hearing Shanks' praise, Loya said nothing, his expression was still serious. Rubbing his fingers, feeling the touch from above, Loya frowned and said, "Lord Shanks, do you know what this is?" "Of course I know." Shanks' answer was somewhat unexpected from Roha, but before Roha could speak, he grinned and said, "However, why should I tell you? Come on, share the information." don't be so stingy. Loya took out his nostrils. Also, you should have come here after discovering the mutation of Ian Island. Now I have enough information in my hand, and you won't be at a loss if you exchange it. Chapter 206 Titan. Titan. Almighty Cultivation Supreme. Loya dares to say that. Naturally he has his self-confidence. Who is Shanks? 4 emperors. One of the scariest monsters in the op world. His every move is concerned with the hearts of the whole world. Regardless of whether he actively pays attention or not, his influence lies there. The wind won't shake it, the rain won't shake it, and others won't pay attention. If Sengoku stomped his feet and shivered the whole great root, then Yuhi's sneeze was a storm that swept the world. This is not only a difference in strength, but also a difference in identity. Yuhi is entrenched in the new world, and no one dares to provoke him. This prestige is not to be compared with Sengoku, who is jokingly called the lackey of the world government. This kind of monster, if it's all right, is impossible to leave its territory and hang out on the sea. He appeared on Ian Island today, and the situation was clear. Essentially, the Yuhifa pirates aren't some kind of vicious guy. They have their own principles, but they are not as naive as Straw Hats, and their methods are fierce, but they are not as cruel as Beard and others. Yuhifa should know what happened on Ian Island, and to say something big in general, for the sake of world peace, so he came. Okay, then let's talk. As it happens, I also want to know what happened here. After thinking for a while, Shanks agreed with Loya's statement. That's what it means. Crack clap. Several ice stools were condensed out and distributed under everyone's buttocks. Looking at these cold-blooded things in front of them, the rest of them pretended not to see it, and went to find something to do. And Shanks watched Roha sit down in pain, so he quietly wrapped armament hockey on his butt, and it hardened, and then he sat up carefully. Clang. Listening to the inaudible symphony of golden iron, Loya pretended not to hear and began to tell. He focused on the Athos family coercing the BB family for immortality, and didn't mention the grievances between himself and the Athos family. After all, the two sides have different identities at the moment. Even if he recognized this role very much before, Loya would not be stupid enough to tell it all. As Loya recounted, Shanks' face was gloomy and uncertain, and the evil spirit on his body also appeared from time to time. When he knew that all the inhabitants of the island had been swallowed up by the insect tide, a tyrannical aura rose into the sky and scattered the clouds in the sky. In the warm sunshine, Shanks' voice was frosty. It's no wonder that no one has found out along the way. It turns out that they are all dead. Yuhifa pirates also looked sullen and silent. So, are the murderers the ones from the BB family? Yes. Facing the question, Loya nodded calmly. However, there is no way to seek revenge from them now. Because, Loya said, dragging an intact corpse under the pile of stones over there with an ice belt. The people of the BB family were eaten as the first batch of Matsuri products after the Athos family, that is, the Tianlong people, were robbed of their consciousness by the blood marrow worm. You see. Loya cut open the belly of the corpse with an ice belt, and the inside came out all over the place. Yellow, green, white, Yuhi's, and dirty internal organs make people sick. But other than that, the most striking thing was the large lump of wrinkled meat. That size and shape are by no means what human beings should have in their stomachs. Looking at the piece of meat that was still wriggling because of the stimulation, Shanks thought thoughtfully, I saw these on the way here. They are the body of the blood marrow worm, right? Yeah, it's not right. Loya continued to control the ice to form a chisel, clinking, and chiseling the ridge behind the meat block Jinchuriki column. This is a relatively complete blood marrow worm corpse, because it was picked out by a sniper among the soldiers. On the back of the blood marrow worm wrapped in a white fleshy membrane, there was only a blood hole as thick as a thumb. Their body is this small mass, that big piece of meat, it's a food organ or something. After Loya finished speaking, with a flick of his hand, the ice belt flew out with the corpse and the frozen swag. So now, can you tell me what the hell is this? Loya pointed to the huge heads beside the two of them. Besides, why was he injured like this? He didn't even die. Huh, Shanks suddenly widened his eyes and turned his head abruptly. Sure enough, although it was still in two pieces, the eyeballs on half of Hukei's head turned slightly. It seems that he was taken aback by Loya's sudden revelations, and he couldn't control it. Ah, I wasn't sure at first, but now it looks like it's really that thing. As he spoke, Shanks touched the hilt of his sword and stood up, nodding politely to Loya. Excuse me then. I'll deal with him first. Loya, deal with. By the way, shouldn't you first talk about what he is? Wait, Shanks. Fortunately, Beckman interrupted Shanks' movement at this time. What's wrong, Beckman? Shanks turned his head strangely. You know this thing, if you don't kill him as soon as possible, the consequences will be disastrous. I know, of course I do. Beckman took a cigarette and glanced at Hook, who was already trembling under Shanks' suffocating aura. Then, he turned to look at Loya and asked, Loya-san, before we got here, it should be you who made Hook roar. So did you find anything unusual? Abnormal? Loya raised his chin and recalled carefully. Suddenly, he clapped his hands, raised his head and looked around, and soon, he found what he was looking for. It was a broken shackle. According to the flying squirrel, it should be his own Tianyu that destroyed this thing, and Hukei was able to escape. Is that the one? Jesus picked up the item and threw it to Beckman. After taking the thing, a smile appeared on the corner of Beckman's mouth, and he greeted Shanks to come over. Look, it's because of this. Shanks looked over his head for a while and slapped his forehead. Oh, yes, only the Thunderstone can completely kill the Titans. I almost forgot about this. Meow meow meow. Loya looked at Shanks and Beckman in shock, and the whole person felt bad. What the hell? What the hell did I just hear? Titan. Thunderstone. In the next step, are there still pandas and the god group coming to visit? Damn. But soon, Loya calmed down after thinking about it. One Piece World is one of the Japanese comics. It is not surprising that these miscellaneous things appear. There is a big bird called the Millennium Dragon. There are projections of divine beasts in various cultures, that is, phantom beasts. There are all kinds of strange intelligent creatures, and there are unreasonably huge sea kings. In that case, it's not surprising that there is a Titan or something. A ghost. This guy is a Titan. Hey Titan. Which world's Titan is a good friend? The Thunderstone. Hello, Zeus. Is your scepter still there? Chapter 207 The Adventures of Shanks. Looking at Loya's shocked appearance, Shanks was a little strange. Although I know that Titans are very scary things, if you leave them alone, the whole new world is in danger of being destroyed. But their own strength is not very exaggerated. You don't need to be afraid of this, right? In Shanks' eyes, this group of Titans, who had only heard of it but had not seen it, was indeed not very strong, and Loya's reaction was a bit overdone. In fact, this is indeed the case. Although he had not been able to hurt the opponent just now, he only destroyed some of the shackles that bound him on Hook's body. But judging from what he showed when he attacked the flying squirrel and Tony, the other party was just huge and powerful. In addition to the thick skin and thick flesh, there is no special ability. Not to mention Loya, some devil fruit abilities with strange abilities can teach him to be a human. No, be a Titan. However, if you really want to kill him, not to mention the strange survivability they are seeing now, that layer of defense cannot be easily broken. Awakened by Shanks' words, Loya blinked slowly. Yes, this is the world of One Piece. This is definitely not what he knew, those perverts who created the world and destroyed the world while traveling in the universe. Think about Momonosuke who must die, the artificial devil fruit Jiaolong fruit he ate, is that TMA Jiaolong? Anyway, Loya will never admit that that kind of garbage will be the great totem of his nation. In other words, these so-called legendary creatures in the world of One Piece have inherited the unreliable setting of Rimmon as always. The dragon is like this, so should the Titan. Ah, Sorry, I confused it. Loya scratched the back of his head embarrassedly. I once saw in a book that Titans are the creators of all things, a group of terrible monsters that can easily destroy the world, so I was surprised. Quote. Huh. Shanks glanced at Loya suspiciously, but he didn't say anything more under Beckman's eyes. But he still silently took Loya's description of the Titan in his heart. Maybe it will be useful in the future. The embarrassment was lifted. Shanks took the broken shackles from Beckman and explained to Loya. Next, let me explain to you what a Titan is. You know, the origin of life. Ah, Loya raised his head and looked at Shanks speechlessly. Well, once you accept this setting, it's quite emotional. So he shook his head. I don't know. Next, it's Shanks' story time. To say that Shanks would know this, it has to start from the period immediately after Roger's death. At that time, in order to establish a pirate group, he went to invite various members, and naturally wandered around the sea. One day, he, Beckman and others came to a small living island. It's a real living island. Because every night, the center of the island opens like a mouth, forming a huge pit with a diameter of about 1 kilometer. The surrounding of the pit is not stone and soil, but a material similar to air-dried bacon. At the same time, a fragrant hallucinogenic liquid secretes in the pits, attracting the animals on the island. Next, the animals who drank the liquid were unknowingly decomposed and absorbed by the strong acid that followed and turned into a pool of bones. It's like the island is foraging for food. This situation surprised Shanks and the others. After careful inspection, they found that the island was indeed alive. It covers the part below the sea surface, plus the place above the sea surface. The shape is almost exactly the same as the animal's stomach bag. With this result, the shock in Shanks' hearts can be imagined. Even if he was the guy who followed Roger to Ralph, it was very shocking to face this situation. Continuing to explore, they finally found some clues on the island. That was the information left by a scientist who landed on the island in an unknown year. Because of the nature of the island, it was called the Stomach Island. In addition, the material also mentioned Titan and the origin of life. This stomach bag is the internal organs of the creature named Titan. After being separated from the body, only one internal organ can survive alone, and it has also evolved the function of autonomous foraging. What a terrible vitality! One can imagine how terrifying those Titans are. The reason why these monsters called Titans have this jaw-dropping vitality, the data speculates, may be because they were the first creatures in this world and the origin of all things. From the data point of view, whether it is Murlocs, humans, sea kings, etc., all life in this world has evolved from them. But these things are not hard-working gardeners, who, as the source of life, hate all living things. As a result, the Op world in ancient times was scorched and lifeless. Later, I don't know what happened. Titan was exterminated overnight, which made the world of One Piece bloom and all things recovered. For such nonsense, Shanks and others did not believe it at first. However, a blue spar the size of a fingernail was left behind along with the information, which made them pay attention to this information. According to records, this stone is the Stone of Thunder, something that is associated with and overcomes the Titan. Just as there must be an antidote 5 steps around a poisonous insect, if the life-hating Titan is venom, then the Thunderstone is anti-venom. By activating the spar, Shanks and the others succeeded in rejuvenating a piece of bacon that had been cut and air-dried for a week. And, that piece of meat actually started to split. One by one, the original Yuhi-colored sticky objects without a fixed form were detached from the meat, and soon they had their own independent consciousness, and frantically attacked everything around them. Whether it was ants or grass roots, they were chewed and swallowed. But because it was the first time to stimulate the spar, they accidentally exerted too much force due to improper control, and the lightning on the spar directly charged these viscous objects into coke. But this is enough to prove that the information is true. Because the Stomach Island is bigger than Ian Island, I didn't think this guy was a Titan just now. Shanks used his fingernails to snap down the small pieces of hedron embedded in the shackles, which glowed a deep blue in the sunlight. However, being restrained by the Thunderstone and possessing this kind of vitality, there is nothing other than the Titan. You're right. Loya, who had been listening, suddenly spoke and threw a box at the same time. Snapped. Shanks didn't lift his head, and didn't care about the flying heavy objects. Then, Beckman, who was beside him, easily caught the box. He was about to say something when he saw the pattern on the box, and he took a deep breath. Hey Shanks, look at this. Huh, what is it? Shanks loosened the shackles on his hands and took the box. On that box, the giant roaring in the sky and holding the giant axe was so clear, and the Ian Island under his feet was so small. You said that titans can only be killed by the Thunderstone, right? Loya touched his chin and said while thinking, if the people of the BB family had the Thunderstone in their hands, then they might kill the pattern. The monsters on top. Well, Shanks didn't answer directly, just threw a small piece of Thunderstone at the shivering hook. Boom. The dull sound of thunder sounded, seemingly far away but so close, as if a firecracker had been placed under the quilt. Then, crack, crack. The vibrating razor and hook's screams were mixed together, and the scene was chaotic for a while. Hearing the screams in his ears, Shanks' slightly closed eyes flashed by the dazzling thunderlight. I think it's possible. Chapter 208 Immortal. The scariest thing about the Titans is that nothing can kill them except the Thunderstone. The key points and weaknesses that ordinary creatures must have do not exist in them. It is even said that they do not have a commanding organ at all, and each cell can be regarded as an independent individual. Therefore, even if they are chopped into pieces and mashed into flesh, it is just a change of life form for them. However, as long as there is enough food supply, this thing can regenerate and multiply indefinitely, and never dissipate. Whether the other party is the source of all creatures in the One Piece world, Loya is not clear. He only knows now that the former BB family really made a big death. The huge guy on the pattern should have been used by them to use the lightning spar. No, the thing that should be called the Thunderstone now was destroyed. But they boldly left a piece of Titan's body tissue to study and trace the origin of life. From a starting point, they are worthy of respect. However, in terms of process and results, they are disgusting. Not only did they release countless experimental blood marrow worms to the sea to find test items, but now there are no living people on the entire Ian Island. And then, what's in this box? Information exchange. Shanks told his story, and now is the time for Loya to come up with the information. He picked up the box and looked from side to side, then shook it to his ear. Jingle. A key made of ice cubes was thrown on the ice table in front of him, and he looked up at Loya, who had a strange face, a little confused. I saw Loya's mouth twitching, and he said amusingly, open it and you'll know. For some reason, Shanks suddenly had a bad feeling. He quickly picked up the key and twisted the sea tower lock on the box. Click. When he saw what was inside, Shanks was in a bad mood. This meow turned out to be the source of life and the Thunderstone. What was I just doing? I still shake them in my ear. Shanks and Beckman looked at the contents in fear, until the light on the blue spar gradually disappeared, and the Yuhi color spar did not change, and they were relieved. Then, Beckman pulled out the Thunderstone with lightning speed and held it high. After doing all this, Beckman looked at Loya speechlessly. Did you do it on purpose? Don't, I'm not that interested. Loya shook his head. By the way, how many people will shake the box directly? Your captain is really weird. If it's a gift box, you can probably guess what's inside by shaking it. But this is obviously not a gift box, and the pattern on the box is so weird. Shanks still took it and started shaking it. This Loya is really insightful. Hee, I already knew about this kind of thing. Nanny Beckman stabbed Shanks very calmly. After talking nonsense, Loya raised his chin and asked, this thing is called the source of life, and it should be left by the Titan who was killed by the BB family. After Loya finished speaking, Shanks looked curiously at the Yuhi-colored spar in the box. So this is the source of life left behind by the Titans after death. This is the first time I have seen real objects. This can explain why Hook hates blood myeloids so much. The origin of these bugs came from the dead Titan, or even Hook himself. The immortal nature of the Titan made the piece of flesh and blood left by the BB family split again and reformed a new Titan, that is, Hook. For these blood worms that appeared from his previous flesh, it would be a joke if Hook treated them equally without any hatred. What's next? Destroy him with the Thunderstone. Although the cause and effect have been cleared up, these are all guesses made by them based on intelligence. Whether it is really the case still needs to be investigated. However, it is obviously not very realistic to leave Hooker alone. The ghost knows whether Hook will secretly split his physical organization, so even if he kills him, it will not be worth the loss if he can't find the rest. It would be better to kill him directly while he was hit hard by Shanks, and his mobility was inconvenient. In this regard, Shanks has the same idea. I think, just in case, let's just kill him. Beckman advised Shanks. I don't want the new world to be full of stomach islands. Okay, then do as you say. Shanks thought about it and agreed with Beckman's suggestion. At this time, Hook, who listened to the words of these human beings, struggled violently, and his toilet head began to close at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon, his mouth closed. Together. No, you can't kill me. I am Hook the Titan King. I am the source of all things. Huh, Loya looked at him dumbfoundedly. Is that you still the King of Titans? Do you think I'm stupid or are you too smart? Cough. Shanks coughed twice to interrupt Loya's words, and then explained. The information says, weren't they exterminated for unknown reasons? Every new Titan after that has the ability to compete for the throne. Qualification: if no one challenges him within 100 years, he is really the king of the Titans. Quote. 100 years. In other words, he was caught and sealed in the ground by the BB family. Even if he wanted to challenge him, no one could find him, right? Loya said with a strange expression. And, are you really sure that there are other Titans in this world? Well, thinking about his experience over the years, Shanks looked back at Hooker strangely. Speaking of which, I have never heard of a Titan appearing anywhere. Even if there are witnesses, it's just the giants of the warrior village Elbaf. Giants. Recalling the Elbaf warrior village, the world's most powerful country, where the characters played all the way in the original book, Loya sighed. Compared to the Titans, they are really small and pitiful. Indeed, the size of the giant clan is not small, and it is known from the island with the name of the small garden that Straw Hat and others passed by. However, even the giant subspecies, the Demon Oz, the monster with a height of 100 meters, was so insignificant in front of Hook. After all, this is a big guy with a head that is more than 30 meters tall. The height is initially estimated to be about 200 meters. The Devil Oz is in front of him, like a child who has not grown. This is still the rebirth after death, the Titan without the previous figure. Thinking about the size of Stomach Island and Hook that Shanks and the others met, the so-called giants are hardly worth mentioning. No, you can't kill me. Please don't kill me. I can help you live forever. You. Eternal life. Immortality. Loya lowered her head and chewed these words. Seeing Loya's reaction, Hook thought he was moved, and quickly added the fire. Yes, only our native Titan can give other beings eternal life. As long as there is that piece of life source, I can. A burst of terrifying aura interrupted Hook's words. He looked intently. At this moment, Loya's eyes had turned into golden vertical pupils. Ice blue scales covered his body, and the sharp bone spurs on his elbows and knees decorated him like a general about to go into battle. The cold wind wrapped around him, whistling blowing, brought coldness and death at the same time. Slowly raising his head, Loya stared at Hook and spit out a few words softly. Fuck for immortality. Just because of this immortality, how many people died in this sea? Just because of immortality, how many tragedies have occurred in this world? Hook's words touched the repression in Loya's heart. From Hansa to Ian Island, Loya's emotions have been deeply hidden in his heart for so long and have not been shown to the outside world. But one thing's for sure, Loya doesn't just laugh at the sunshine like he looks on the outside. His heart was already full of anger. After speaking, Loya's figure suddenly turned into a black line. Shaved, month step. Second stage acceleration. Beckman's eyes flashed, and his hands suddenly became lighter. Looking again, the thunder spar that was still in his hand has disappeared. Then, in the next second, the pseudo-dragonized Loya appeared above Hook's still unhealed head, lying horizontally in the air. Immortal life, I'll let you die now. After saying that, Roja spun violently, and the wind pressure brought the air to make a whimpering sound. Then he stopped suddenly, and smashed the thunderstone in his hand into Hook's head by inertia. Chapter 209 Loya's Daily Life. Whoosh. Under the blessing of Roja's strange power and inertia, the thunderstone was like a meteorite, wrapped in a gust of wind, and smashed into Hook's unhealed head in an instant. At that speed, even Shanks couldn't see the movement of the thunderstone clearly. Only a dazzling trace was imprinted on the retina, telling him where the stone had gone. But at the moment he doesn't care about this issue at all, he only knows that Loya is using the method of smashing to activate the thunderstone to kill Hook. So here comes the question. I remember. This thing touches the Titan and explodes, right? Shanks pondered with his chin up, and then suddenly he found himself flying backwards, as if someone was dragging him by the collar. In fact it is so. Beckman, what are you doing? What? Beckman almost let go of his hand when Shanks choked on a word, but in order to avoid a disgraced ending for a face-loving four emperors, he resisted the urge. Escape, of course, Captain. Have you forgotten how Stomach Island disappeared? As the fattest one among the whole crew, Lajalu's speed is the fastest one, he explained quickly, and then continued to run wildly. Oh, yes, the Thunderstone will explode when it encounters a Titan. And its power is more terrifying than the bomb rock. Shanks slammed the palm of his hand and suddenly realized. Then why don't you run by yourself? Beckman roared Kiba, and threw Shanks out. Just before Shanks and the others ran to their heart's content, the Beebe family's castle far away from the town. The ruins. Get out of the way, let me come. After saying that, the flying squirrel stepped forward under the silent eyes of the soldier. If it wasn't for the love knife, he would have shot it early in the morning. But it's not too late. Loya and Shanks have negotiated things over Simon's side, so he doesn't need to worry about it. As long as you catch this bug yourself, you can either judge or kill it. Standing in front of the huge iceberg, the flying squirrel held the scabbard in one hand and the hilt in the other, with his knees slightly bent, maintaining a half-squatting position. A few seconds later, his eyes widened, he stepped forward with his right foot, and drew his sword out. Kama Itachi Mai. Whoosh whoosh. He clearly only swung out a sword, but it shot out countless dazzling blue and white sword energy. These blue and white sword chi joined together, like a violent storm, and immediately covered the iceberg in front of them. Boom, crash. The sharp sword chi hit the iceberg, and a dull shattering sound continued to sound. The power of these sword chi is astonishing. Even in the face of the ice cubes created by Loya's magic, they can still leave a deep ravine when they collide. Under the baptism of sword energy, piles of broken ice residues splashed down from the iceberg very soon. In the face of the flying squirrel's full-strength slash, the iron-hard iceberg collapsed quickly like a crisp biscuit at a speed visible to the naked eye. Too powerful, worthy of being Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. It is a terrifying power to be able to cut through such a hard iceberg with just a slash through the air. Looking at the scene in front of them, the surrounding Navy soldiers carrying shovels and hoes showed shocked expressions. But then again. So, since you can cut through the iceberg so easily, why did we dig it just now? Blisters popped out of my hands, Sama the flying squirrel. Feeling the resentful eyes of the soldiers around him, the flying squirrel pretended not to see it, and continued to caress the more and more widening gap on the love knife. No more attacks. Blowing a hole and breaking completely are absolutely opposite situations for a sword. The former only needs to find a master-level craftsman, and there is a chance to repair it at a cost. And the latter, it can only be declared scrapped. After all, they are the only big sharp knives left in the world. If it was that simple and could be recast completely at will, they would not be only 21. Just when the flying squirrel felt distressed about the weapon, a blood-colored granulation about the size of the thumb burst out from the ice Yamanaka that was constantly collapsing, aiming directly at his head. The speed of that yuhi-colored granulation was so fast, it was less than 10 centimeters behind the flying squirrel's head in less than a second. Seeing this, Master Da, who had long been frozen in the iceberg and only had a few tentacles to move, couldn't help showing an ugly smile. With the movement, the terrifying frozen cracked skin on its face immediately shattered, revealing the stiff pink yuhi-colored muscles inside. Among the people present, only this purple hair can pose a threat to him. As long as he is killed, no one can stop him from escaping. The most important thing is that since that monster has not come back, then you must seize this heaven-sent opportunity. With the cover of ice cubes and smoke, when the granulation was about to penetrate the flying squirrel's head, the joy in Master Da's eyes was undisguised. He seemed to have seen the scene of the flying squirrel's white brains sputtering out. However, at this moment, a shadow shrouded the flying squirrel's head. Ding! Granulation still stabbed the flying squirrel's purple-haired head as expected, but that's all. Those black ones are armament hockey. Lord Da's eyes widened, and he naturally recognized this power, inheriting the memory of the Bibi family patriarch. Knowing that the sneak attack failed, Master Da subconsciously prepared to escape, but he saw Flying Squirrel turn his head with a dark old face, his body full of murderous aura. It was indeed an old face, because the sudden attack, the Flying Squirrel could only directly wrap his entire head around armament hockey, and it hardened. Now his face is black and armament hockey is on. Through the smoke and dust, the Flying Squirrel's eyes were fixed on Dai. He paused for a second on the frozen purple skin on his body, and then stroked the hilt of the sword. I heard that your body is just the piece of meat on the ridge Jinchuriki column, right? Flying Squirrel said calmly with a sullen face. Then your head is a bit redundant now. Master Da was about to say something when a sword light interrupted him. Puff. This is the sound of a sharp blade cutting into the flesh, and Lord Da is familiar with it, because it has used granulation to form a sharp blade and penetrate others more than once. But in the past, the voice came from someone else, but this time, the voice was so close, so close. Ah! The piercing screams echoed over the empty ruins, mournful and desperate. The naval headquarters, the marshal's office. Blue blue, blue blue. Click _ Sengoku, who was flipping through the documents, only picked up the phone bug with one hand, without raising his head. His eyes continued to stay on the document in front of him. Hello, who is it? What's the matter? Marshal, there was a big explosion in the direction of Ian Island just now. Do I need to go over and take a look? The voice from the phone bug was a little lazy and a little casual, as calm as it was speaking Chinese. But what he said made Sengoku's eyelids twitch. Ian Island. Sengoku put down the document and held his forehead weakly. It's Royana bastard again. Is he a bomb? Wherever he goes, he blows up. Loya is simply a humanoid self-propelled bomb. Wherever you go, you can declare GG. This is the case from Heathville, to Crispia, and now to Ian Island. On the other end of the phone, in an office, a black-haired man turned the emerald green flute in his hand and fell into silence. Well, how should I interface it? I'm just a major general, or a major general of the branch. This kind of topic involves the lieutenant general of the headquarters, or the 17th lieutenant general of the headquarters who has been very prestigious recently, so don't talk about it, okay? So after Sengoku finished speaking, both sides fell into silence at the same time. After a long time, Sengoku glanced at the phone bug and waved his hand. Go, take the doctor with you by the way. Inform Lieutenant General Hablo and let him help them prepare supplies. Yes, Marshal Sengoku. After speaking, Major General Alex hung up the phone bug, turned around and left the office. Chapter 210 Ian Island's Sinkhole. A few minutes ago, Ian Island. What are they running for? Looking at the members of the Yuhi-haired pirates who were running wild like a husky, Luoya pondered this question. But then he understood what the problem was, because the dragon body and observation hockey began to warn at the same time, making him smell the smell of death after a long absence. And the source of his sense of danger was the hook below. In this direction, Loya looked down at the place where the lightning was already thick like a liquid, and swallowed quietly. By the way, how powerful is this thing's explosion? The next second, the thunderstone gave its answer. Its power is devastating. Boom, boom. A terrifying vibration suddenly appeared, and in just an instant, several deep cracks appeared on the ground that stretched for hundreds of meters. After that, the thunder-like explosion sound entered Loya's ears. The sudden loud sound made him only feel a tingling in his ears, and blood flowed down his cheeks. In this noisy environment, the brains in his head seemed to be shaking, making him dizzy. But even so, Rojas still kept up his spirits, flapped his wings hard, and quickly rose into the sky. Run away, run away. That's the only way Dragon Body and Observation Hockey told him to stay alive. However, his movements were a beat slower than Shanks and others. When he started to make moves, an irresistible, terrifying impact he had never experienced suddenly hit his back. Puff! The two hard dragon wings that can be used to cut steel were instantly broken, and the terrifying impact tore apart the ice armor and the dragon's scale defense layer, and slapped him on the back mercilessly, causing him to spit out a large mouthful of blood. In the next second, Loya was like a baseball, which was heavily hit and flew out. For some reason, when the active thunderstone touched Hook, it was not itself that exploded, but Hook. And this explosion started from Hook's feet. Then all the way up, delayed explosions, and finally to Hooker's brain. So this is the scene where the ground is shaken away first, and then Loya is hit by the impact. However, in terms of results, the overall explosion is similar to the current gradual explosion. Loya's position is too forward, and the movement of leaving is too slow, unable to react at all, and the impact of the explosion has already hit the face. Shanks and his party were very fast. After all, they were all old-fashioned strong men, and they didn't have such obvious weaknesses. Feeling the terrifying vibrations and loud noises from behind, Shanks seemed to recall his experience on Stomach Island again. That's really not a good memory. So he accelerated again, and soon overtook Lakey Road in the first echelon, making the big fat man who even threw his chicken legs in a daze. At this time, the sniper, Jesus B.U., raised his head consciously and greeted everyone. Hey, everyone, look up in the sky, is that the Navy boy? When Shanks heard the words, he looked up. He couldn't see clearly at this distance, but with the blue silhouette and the wide wings behind him, there was only Loya on this island now. Hey, what kind of flying posture is this? It's really self-willed to have wings. Shanks said jealously. Fuck you, didn't you see his broken wings? Jesus snarled Kiba. Beckman, who was running, looked up, then silently estimated the distance in his heart, speeding up to catch up with Lajaloo. Hey Lou, do me a favor. Oh. A trace of doubt flashed in Lajaloo's eyes under the tinted glasses at first, but when he saw Beckman's gesture pointing to the sky, he suddenly woke up. As he was running, he stomped on the ground and smashed the ground, causing himself to stop abruptly. Then he turned around, crossed his hands and fingers, and held them on his lower abdomen. Facing the rapidly approaching Beckman, Lakaloo shouted loudly, in which direction? 630, _ Received. Pat. Beckman stepped on the palm held by Lajaloo with one foot, bent his knees and prepared to jump up. Stand up. Rakaloo's face turned pale and Tong Yuhi shouted anxiously. Beckman's strength is not small. This simple step is enough to break the bones of ordinary people. Fortunately, Beckman is strong, and he is even stronger. Bite the Kiba pass. Rakaloo supported Beckman and lifted it back hard. Let's go. Boom. The next moment, Beckman was fired directly like a bullet in the direction of Loya, who was constantly spinning and falling. At the same time, the gloomy flying squirrel kicked the meat and was about to return to the town. But then, a terrifying explosion occurred. Boom. The ground beneath your feet was as soft as cotton candy, bobbing up and down. In the terrifying vibration, the earth was easily torn apart, revealing a crack. Ah! The big piece of meat that was kicked around like a ball. No, Lorda screamed and rolled into a crack of just the right size. The crack is not very wide, and ordinary children can only pull in one thigh, but the width is just enough for Lorda to get stuck in it. Fall, can't fall, climb, can't get out. Especially after the flying squirrel cut off his main granulation buds, Masterda, who was seriously injured, had no way to break free. What's wrong? Earthquake. Come and help someone. Someone fell. Medic, get the first aid kit. A group of Navy soldiers was in a hurry by the sudden attack, running around in a mess. Flying Squirrel first glanced at his subordinates, then pierced Masterda with his sword, made it scream and lifted it out. After doing this, the Flying Squirrel loudly greeted the soldiers, "Don't panic. This is not an earthquake. The shaking is over. You guys, hurry up and save the fallen brothers. You guys, prepare to rescue the wounded." Under the influence of the Flying Squirrel's aura, the panicked Navy soldiers quickly calmed down. They are already elite, and their quality does not need to be mentioned more. I was just a little panicked by the vibration just now, but now I calm down and everything is in order. After comforting the soldiers, the Flying Squirrel, who was also startled by the explosion, had time to look in the direction of the town. Because of the long distance, what they encountered was only a little aftermath, and around the town, the most central area of the explosion had now been razed to the ground. No, to be precise, it has become a sinkhole. With the town as the center, a huge pit with a diameter of 10 kilometers appeared there. Around the pit, the scratches from the brushes were left there, making the pit appear as if someone had scraped it out with a tool. The seawater continued to pour up from the most central breach, rushing straight to an altitude of tens of meters, and then sprinkled down, blowing away the smoke and dust, and soon formed a lake in situ. Huh! The cool breeze blowing from behind made the Flying Squirrel feel numb on its scalp. He is well informed and knows that this wind is due to the air current that was refilled after the explosion just now squeezed out the air over there. The appearance of this situation is enough to prove the power of the explosion just now. With this power, Bomb Rock can't keep up with it, right? Looking at the Tianqing that seemed to be close at hand, Nan and the Flying Squirrel was speechless. Loya, it should be alright, right? Chapter 211 After the Explosion. In other words, I made a mistake yesterday, and Shanks couldn't have hammered the palm. Thank you book friend Longming for bringing it up. However, I deliberately left the point of 6:30, and it's really sad that I didn't get scolded. The Omen show is the most embarrassing. Dividing line. Should Loya be alright now? Of course not. When he woke up, the first thing he saw was Reikalu's big greasy face. To tell the truth, don't look at Yuhi's pirate group being beaten by bandits in the East China Sea without fighting back, laughing all day long. But in the end, this fat man who is always smiling is also a ruthless character who will directly shoot people in the head. Such a guy can't make people feel like a spring breeze when he smiles. On the contrary, Loya was taken aback. It's a real jump. He jumped up more than a meter high on the spot, and when he turned back, he kicked forward, kicking Lakilu, who was caught off guard, fiercely. Loya, hold the grass. Lakilu, hold the grass. The two yelled and cursed at the same time, and they were both frightened by the other side. After landing, Loya immediately felt a piercing pain, and the muscles and bones of the whole body were groaning overwhelmingly. PFF'd. As soon as he stood on the ground, Loya fell directly on the ground because of the severe pain. On the other side, Lajalu continued to roll on the ground, his fat belly made him very elastic, and he stopped rolling until he was stepped on by Beckman. Smoking a cigarette, Beckman looked at Loya impatiently. Hey, boy, is this how you treat your savior? Help me, people. Loya repeated the term blankly, then tried his best to tilt his head back. Is this pit caused by the explosion just now? From the point of view of him lying on the ground, Ian Island at this moment has directly changed from a hilly landform to a basin, and the huge pothole can hardly be seen at a glance. That's right, I remembered it. The brain that had just woken up and was not clear was stimulated by the sight in front of him, and Loya immediately remembered what he saw before he fell into a coma. If you say that. He turned his head, looked at the lackey road that Beckman was stepping on, and put his hands together in embarrassment. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I just woke up and didn't regain my senses. Lakealoo, who had a footprint on his face, looked helpless, but the other party really didn't do it intentionally, so he could only sigh. Okay, I forgive you. But I will prepare the best food for you as compensation. Trust me, there are chefs I specially invited on my warship to ensure your satisfaction. Without waiting for Lajaloo's words, Loya understood the other party's thoughts. Hearing Loya's assurance, Lakealoo immediately agreed with bright eyes. This is a tacit understanding between foodies, it is so unscientific. I understand the truth, but can you both stand up and talk? At this moment, Shank's voice interrupted their eye contact. The two turned their heads at the same time. Shanks squatted on the ground and looked at them from side to side with his head tilted. Aren't you tired of talking like this? Yes, Beckman, let me go. When Lajaloo heard the words, he remembered that he was still being trampled under his feet, and immediately began to struggle. Okay. Beckman took his foot away according to his words, so that Lajaloo could get up. But he did get up, and Loya over there couldn't do such a difficult movement. Having endured the baptism of the explosion head-on, he is really miserable now. The pseudo-dragonization had already been lifted in a coma, revealing his bloody wounds. After speaking for a short while, a pool of blood had formed under him. Especially his back, where a large piece of meat disappeared, only a little flesh and blood was wrapped around his back, and even the white ridges Jinchuriki column and beating internal organs could be seen faintly. But even if the injury was so serious, Shanks and others did not bandage him when he was in a coma. It's not because they are so ruthless, or because they want to see if Loya will die. The real reason is because at the location of those shocking wounds, small granulation buds are constantly squirming, weaving each other, and stitching the wounds together. The injury that looks terrifying is actually just a serious injury to Roja, and it will not die. Bandaging wounds is counterproductive and affects wound healing. Looking at Loya's fast-healing wound, Shanks sighed. Speaking of which, your resilience is really terrifying. When you were rescued half an hour ago, you had no good skin on your body, but now you have no skin left. Can hit such a powerful kick. Quote. How should I say it? As expected of a dragon of the mythical beast species. Well, Loya felt the condition of her body, and couldn't help but feel shocked by her resilience. After all, I'm a zoology. Crack clap. While speaking, Loya's body began to tremble constantly, like a mobile phone with the vibration mode turned on. With a crisp sound, pieces of broken bones were connected, and the dislocated knuckles stretched out like dead branches. With a click, they returned to their normal positions. During this process, Loya kept lying on his stomach and did not move, fully mobilizing every strength in his body to repair the damage. The sweat on his forehead proved how painful the process was, but even so, his expression remained the same. The sextile derivative skill of the Navy, return of life. You actually learned this pervert trick. Shanks couldn't help but glanced at Loya again. This patience and perseverance, you really should be the Lieutenant General of the headquarters. Name. Thanks for the compliment. With a long exhalation, Loya, who simply repaired the damage, quickly burst out with large chunks of ice, which stuck to the wound, causing his sore eyelids to twitch. Frost Armor Type 217 Power Exoskeleton. The ice armor quickly covered him, and Roja controlled the ice to support the ground and lifted himself up. Later, In the shocked eyes of Shanks and others, Loya calmly took out the same dying phone bug from Kabuto. That broken snail shell told Loya. Medic, get over here, Daddy. Che, can't make a phone call. I really don't know what happened to Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. Can you stand up like this? What material are you made of? Shanks looked at Loya with a bewildered expression. The opponent's tenacity was beyond his imagination. But speaking of flying squirrels. He turned his head and looked in the other direction, and said, don't worry, I have seen his purple hair, and it will take a while to get to us. But then again, what do you think? Loya knew what Shanks was referring to, and suddenly felt more embarrassed than kicking Lajaloo just now. I said, I really don't know, do you believe it? Shanks. Ha, congratulations on becoming the 100th guy, the first know who is unreliable and does things without thinking. Beckman hummed beside him with a smile. You should be glad that the Thunderstone only met Titan when he met him. It will explode when we are there. If we were on the Stomach Island now, it is estimated that the entire crew would not even be able to find any bones. Quote. Stomach Bag Island is not a small island. Compared with the small island of Ian Island, it can be really big. Moreover, the entire island is the body tissue of Titans, and the scene after the place was detonated by the Thunderstone left a deep impression on Shanks. It's true, it's impressive. Chapter 212 Hard-Mouthed Grandpa. Loya, are you all right? Still far away, the flying squirt called out nervously. At the same time, ignoring the gap of the love knife, he pulled out the weapon and aimed it at Shanks and the others. Because from the flying squirrel's point of view, Loya is being besieged by the Uhifa pirates at the moment. If you don't believe me, look, he even used the ice exoskeleton from the day of the prison battle. Kaka. A group of Navy soldiers also picked up their weapons, loaded their bullets, and aimed at Yuhi and sent the pirates. As soon as the flying squirrel gave an order, they would pull the trigger. Is there any use to put it aside? As a Navy, how can you watch your officer be attacked by pirates? However, when the flying squirrel and the others were facing the enemy, Shanks was very moved at this moment. Look, I am indeed the fourth emperor, and people are afraid of me. Woohoo, I'm not a fake 4 emperors. Loya looked at the flying squirrel running over, and the meat under his feet that he kicked all the way. The movements are fluent and the legs are skilled, and Loya has also seen it in the national football team. Speaking of flying squirrel, you used to be on the football team, right? Soon, the flying squirrel approached them, and then he realized that he wanted to fork just now. Because although Loya is not in a good state now, he is not at all cautious and serious about being attacked by the 4 emperor pirates. On the contrary, he just stood there casually, with his back to the dangerous pirates. Now, what's the situation, Loya? Flying Squirrel stopped with a bewildered look at a place more than 10 meters away from the Uhifa pirates. Now, Roha manipulated the ice cube to scan the field, and then said to the Flying Squirrel, there is only one problem now, and that is how many blood marrow worms have been spread by the BB family, and where the hell are these bugs now? Indeed, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. Beckman stood up, smoking a cigarette lightly. There is no difference between a navy and a pirate right now, only us, who are both human, and our enemy, the blood marrow worm. Hey, is that so? The Flying Squirrel continued to stare at them dazedly. However, he knew that during the time he was away, something must have happened outrageous, which made Loya and Shanks and others so harmonious. But there is one question that must be made clear in advance. What about our soldiers? Were they imprisoned by you? Snapped. Beckman slapped his forehead and almost forgot about it. So he pointed to one direction of the island and said, your people are in a cave in the southeast corner of the island. You can go and bring them back first. Don't worry, we didn't mistreat them. Oh, that's it. Although he was still vigilant about Shanks and others, the Flying Squirrel felt that Simon and the others were more important when the safety of Simon and others was placed on the scale. After all, the safety of Simon and others involves Loya and Zepha. The former is more related to his own fate, so he can't handle it with caution. You guys, go over there and bring people back. Be careful. Yes. After receiving the order, several team leaders immediately counted the players and prepared to set off. At this time, Jesus Cloth stood up. Captain, let me go with them. After all, the little guys left on the boat don't know our current situation. If the Navy is shot, I'm afraid they will die miserably. Then, Jesus Cloth added, it is the Navy who will die miserably. Facing the words of Jesus Cloth that can be regarded as provocative, the flying squirrel's face is ugly. But now the situation is stronger than people. After Loya was seriously injured, the master of the other party had absolute initiative and could not allow him to demonstrate justice. And flying squirrels are not red dogs, so they are not that extreme. So, the flying squirt snorted and expressed his attitude, but didn't say anything more. Unlike Loya, who is a traveler, the attitude of Flying Squirrel and Jesus Cloth is the correct way to open the encounter between the world's navy and pirates. After receiving Shank's approval, Jesus Cloth led the way forward, walking in front of the navy with a knife and a gun. The arrogant-looking soldiers could not wait to be killed by a bullet. However, because of the identity of the other party and the order of the Flying Squirrel, they did not dare to do so. Waiting for the soldiers to walk away, the Flying Squirrel slowly approached Loya. So, now, can you tell me what happened? After a few minutes. So, this thing has such an exaggerated origin. Through Loya's remarks just now, the Flying Squirrel looked at the meat under his feet with lingering fears. Who would have known that just this disgusting parasite, they would have such a big background? Yeah, who would have thought? Loya couldn't help but smack his lips, expressing his shock at the origin of the blood marrow worm. But now is not the time to talk about it. Slap. An ice hand rose from the ground, grabbed Lord D's body in the palm of his hand, and lifted it up. He glanced at Tony who was beside him, and then said coldly to the trembling Master Da, so now, can you tell me how many blood marrow worms you have released? I can make your death quicker, Bug. The BB family didn't just let the blood marrow worm out, they needed the experimental body, and it was useless to observe it. Judging from the attack by pirates in Tony's hometown, the BB family has always paid great attention to these test items. As the former patriarch of the BB family, Master Da, who devoured each other's memories, must know how to find those bugs. Squeak. Yeah. Being held tightly by the ice, Master Da once again felt the cold killing intent and the unmatched power. But because of this, he tried his best to squeeze a smile out of the blue and purple flesh. It's all dead anyway, so why don't I drag more people into the water? You bastard. Boom. As soon as this sentence was finished, two surging pressures fell directly on him. That's Loya's dragon power and Shank's conqueror's haki. During the agitation, countless Yuhi black lightnings appeared in the void, and a little touch created a bottomless pit in the ground. Okay, so scary. Is this the aura of the four emperors of the New World? Lieutenant General Loya is also very powerful. Even under the control of Shanks, the naval soldiers were not affected much, but only a trace of aftermath leaked out was enough to make them tremble. Not to mention the bug-level power of Loya's Longway. As the main target of the two, Master Da just froze in place. Can't move, can't move. He could feel that any of these forces could easily turn him into a powder. Now he is still alive, just because they check and balance each other and maintain a delicate balance. But not being able to move doesn't mean that you can't speak. Ha ha ha, get angry, despair, ridiculous humans. Lord Da laughed wildly. As long as there is one blood marrow worm alive, our race will eventually expand. At that time, we will have the final say in this world. You killed one of me, and there are thousands of me in the world. You can't just kill us. Loya. Heck, I suddenly found that this thing really sucks. Shaming Han and Chan's coffin lids can't hold down. Hey. However, what Dean said is also true. He now knows that there is no possibility of surviving, and dragging more people into the water is undoubtedly the last madness. In response, Loya had to look at Shanks and asked, "What should I do now?" "Salad." Shanks returned such a look. Just when everyone was at a loss, Beckman said lightly, "Oh, doesn't it say yes?" "Then kill it. Anyway, there are other ways to find those bugs." Master D's arrogant voice came to an abrupt end, and it was obviously just imitating it, and even the eyelids and lips had no facial features, showing a clearly visible black question mark face. TF. And this kind of thing. I don't know how. Chapter 213. Boy, eat it. The people around stared blankly at Beckman, not knowing what important information this resourceful master had. "Don't. Stop joking, you liar," Dee yelled nervously. "No one can find them except me." "You are lying." It's natural for Lord De to be nervous, because as long as he doesn't tell Loya and the others about the whereabouts of the blood marrow worms, he will have more vitality. Now Beckman's intention is to deprive him of this last shred of vitality, so he is naturally very nervous. Hearing Master D's words, Beckman glanced at him lightly. "Oh, a lie. Well, but it's no wonder you think so. After all, you're just a little bug who doesn't even know your origin, and of course you don't know how to do it." Origin. The rest of the people recited the word silently, and then immediately woke up. Loya's eyes lit up. "You mean, Titan." "That's it." Beckman took out the box that Loya gave them before and held it in his hand. Before the Big Bang, Beckman was dragging Shanks with one hand and holding the box with the other. He took out the source of life inside and asked Shanks with a smile, "Captain, you won't forget the use of this thing?" "Huh, me, when? Of course I didn't forget," Shanks replied in a pretentious manner, then turned his brain with all his strength, recalling the description of the source of life in the document. As soon as he heard his pretended calm tone, Beckman knew that Shanks had forgotten this information. Suddenly, Beckman sighed helplessly. "Hey, forget it, I'll tell everyone directly. The Titan is immortal, even if it is cut into minced meat, it can continue to survive, but it is just a change of life form. And the things that support their willfulness, apart from the differences in composition that are not explained in the documentation, the most important reason is the source of life. The status of this thing to Titans is the same as that of the heart to humans, and it is even more important. It is the source and end of everything, and it is also an important component of the Titan's immortality. Because in addition to the outer shell, the internal organs of the Titans all grow from the source of life. Without the source of life, Hook is just a bunch of aggregates of original muscle tissue, which looks normal from the outside, but it can be seen from the inside that he is not actually complete. This is also the reason why Hook urgently needs the source of life. Only by obtaining his previous source of life can he break free from the shackles and return to his original, indomitable, appearance. That is, a complete Titan. So the question is, what is the connection between Hook, who can exist alone, and the source of life that he does not know for many years? Why can Hook change back when he takes back the source of life? It is important to know that blood transfusion is urgently required for bleeding after injury, and matching blood is also required. In the words Loya knew, it was a matter of blood type. The fishman tiger died because he couldn't find a matching blood type and was disgusted by humans and was unwilling to donate blood. Since Hook can be reborn as long as he gets the source of life, does it prove that there is actually some kind of connection between the source of life and Hook? This information has been proven, even if it is the stomach bag island that has existed for many years. When the organization on it encounters a certain source of life, it will still recognize its former position and take the initiative to paste it. Just like now. Beckman's smile was like a demon, holding the source of life shaking in front of Master Da. "How, do you really want to eat it?" With his movements, Master Da's eyes also turned, one left and one right, like a puppy looking forward to feeding. "I understand, you mean, we only need to take this, we don't need to actively search for blood marrow worms." Loya pondered for a while, and said, "Although blood marrow worms are a new breed of two kinds of worms. But their main body is still split from the cellular organization of Hook, and has the same origin with Hook. As long as they hold this, they will naturally move to where we are, am I right? That's right. Beckman snapped his fingers and stood up. Looking at the source of life that was getting farther and farther away, Master De anxiously stretched out his tentacles, trying to touch the bloody Yuhi-colored spar. Just like what Beckman said, Lord De also knows the effect of the source of life. As long as he gets this spar, he is the new Titan. In this time when the Thunderstone didn't know where the explosion went, he was invincible as a Titan. What if the opponent is the 4 emperors of the New World? Can't beat, can I still run? However, with several bigwigs in front of it, his actions were doomed to be futile from the start. Laugh. Seeing that Master De dared to stretch out his tentacles, the flying squirrel was rude and cut them off directly. Depressed, Master De had to withdraw the remaining tentacles and looked at the source of life in Beckman's hands unwillingly. But there is a problem that the source of life can affect the scope is too small. Beckman suddenly remembered this question: do we want to find it island by island? Hey, there will be accidents in the New World. Ah. This is indeed a problem. Just by looking at Lord De, he didn't have any abnormal reaction at all before the box was opened. The scope of the influence of the source of life can be imagined. And it's very easy to be disturbed. Ha ha ha, I knew it was impossible. Hearing this, Master De knew that his chance was coming. Come and beg me. I'll tell you if you beg me. Ha 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 ha. Laugh. Several ice thorns protruded from the center of the ice palm, piercing De Yedong there. Although it wasn't fatal, the cold air from the ice thorns was enough to shut up Master De. Loya glanced at him and sneered, why do you think we won't avoid you when we talk about it? Huh. Because we were prepared to silence it from the start. Gollum. Hearing this, Master De wriggled with difficulty and stopped making trouble. By the way, I remember. At this time, Shank's voice interrupted Loya's teasing of Lord De. He looked back and saw Shanks happily running to Tony's side. Hey, boy, you also have blood myeloid parasites in your body, right? Tony looked at the big man rushing in front of him with a bewildered expression, and pointed his finger at his nose. Are you talking to me? Isn't this nonsense? Hurry up and tell me if it is. Shanks waved his hand impatiently. Yes, my body is indeed parasitized by blood marrow worms. After regaining his senses, Tony stood upright in surprise and answered loudly. The flying squirrel's eyelids twitched from the flattered look. Hey, you're the Navy. So excited because of being chatted by pirates. You are not ashamed. Even if the other party is the 4 emperors of the New World. That's it. Shanks and Beckman smiled at each other, pointed at the Yuhi-colored spar and said, come on boy, eat this thing. Chapter 214 I'm gonna start now. Eat. Is this thing edible? Or grind it into powder and drink it with water? Tony dazedly held the source of life that Shanks shoved over, a little overwhelmed. Hey, the point is why should you eat it? Loya complained beside him, then turned his gaze to Shanks, waiting for his answer. Because he succeeded in getting the blood marrow worm to identify with him. And it is very rare to be able to not lose his true heart in the killing. Shanks grinned, revealing 8 shining doors Kiba. Not only you only have the information on blood marrow worms. After speaking, Shanks dug into his pants kabuto for a long time. Finally, he threw his hands at Beckman in embarrassment. Hey, that, is it with you? Ah, I'm used to it. Beckman held his forehead weakly, then took out the cigarette case from the kabuto shirt, and then took out a yellowed paper from the interlayer of the cigarette case. Although bloodworms and bloodworms can't be completely confused, in terms of priority, Titan's instinct is greater than the part that bloodworms later mixed in. So what I said above should also apply to this kid. Taking the paper, Loya carefully studied the information on it. It turned out that the Bibi family was not the first to eat crabs when bloodworms were parasitized in the human body. As early as on Stomach Pouch Island, this document detailed the process and results of bloodworm parasitism. Of course, they weren't called bloodworms at that time, but Titan splits. What is amazing is that it is also something split from the immortal Titan, but these things are different from ordinary organizations, and they can't survive alone. It is speculated from the data that this situation is the same as the Titan organizations that have lost their vitality like stones on the Stomach Island. Regardless of whether their bodies are immortal or not, they all need a supply of energy to maintain their form. So he conducted an experiment to let bloodworms burrow into his own blood vessels to see if they could survive by absorbing nutrients from their own bodies. And then, he died. This TM is embarrassing. How could a scientist with a weak physique, even an old dragon bell, be able to withstand the absorption of bloodworms that are extremely hungry and thirsty? Almost as soon as the experiment started, he was sucked into a human. But soon, he came back to life. Because he carries a source of life with him. The bloodworm felt the breath of the source of life, took the initiative to paste it, and chose to return to the body. At the same time, because of the source of life, the powerful vitality that belonged to the Titan penetrated into his body, not only making him alive, but also turning him into a new Titan. When Shanks and others met him, he had changed from a little giant over 3 meters tall to a monster over 50 meters tall. A punch and a kick are enough to tear the earth and space apart, and at the same time, Shanks' slashing can't easily break the defense. But this kind of ending was not what he wanted. The Titan's instinct continued to erode his sanity, making him only want to kill everything alive. He begged Shanks to kill him and take out his research, hoping that someone could continue his research. At the same time, tell Shanks that using the source of life can indeed give humans the power of Titan. However, this must require strong willpower to suppress the destructive instinct brought by the Titan organization. Yes, the destructive nature of the Titan's instinct does not emanate from the source of life, but is attached to the muscle tissue. He reluctantly summed up a little experience, that is, as long as the first instinct is suppressed during fusion, then under the influence of unknown reasons, after the fusion of the remaining organizations, they will move closer to the original situation and obey their own will. That is to say, because the current Tony has made the blood marrow worm obey him, which is equivalent to suppressing the initial destructive instinct of fusion into a Titan. Loya pondered the information and asked, "So you plan to turn Tony into the new Titan, attracting bloodworms?" It's a Titan who keeps his senses and doesn't get swept away by the Titan's destroying instincts. Shanks added, "As long as he succeeds, then we don't have to look for them everywhere, they will come to find us." Is that really the case? Loya looked at Shanks suspiciously. "Why do I always feel that you have some ulterior motive?" Haha, an illusion, it must be your illusion. Shanks laughed exaggeratedly, his eyes dodged, and he didn't dare to look at him. "No, I firmly disagree." The flying squirrel stood up. "The blood marrow worm can be found at any time, but there is only one life. If things don't develop according to your expectations, Tony's life is in danger. And, quote," he turned to look at Loya, "in the event of an accident, have you thought about how to explain it to Teacher Zepha?" Well, indeed, Zepha's side is really not easy to deal with. And for what Shanks said, Loya didn't really believe it. But one thing is certain, at this stage, Shanks will not lie to them. I just don't know what will be tricky after Tony becomes a Titan. So, Loya set his eyes on Tony and asked, "So, what do you mean?" "I think I can give it a try." Tony looked at Loya firmly, and smiled freely. "Isn't the worst result death?" "I'm still afraid of that." Tony's decisiveness and determination shocked everyone, and even Shanks was a little embarrassed. Didn't he know it was something that would kill people? In the crowd, only 2 people somewhat understood Tony's choice. "Oh, that's it." Loya stared at Tony for a while, and stopped for a second at the sword mark on the bridge of his nose. Then, he took control of the exoskeleton, turned and walked away. If Tony fails later, whether he ends up being killed or imprisoned like Hook, that's not what Loya wants to see. Watching Loya walk away, Tony's expression gradually dimmed, and he whispered to himself, "Loya, this is not only for Hansa, but for those innocent people, this is also me." Catching up with you the only way. Quote. From the day he was parasitized by the blood myeloid worm, Tony knew that his destiny had already been tied to it. His path to becoming stronger is the same. Tony's evolution. Let's call it evolution. Tony's evolutionary journey doesn't officially begin until more than an hour later. Because the Thunderstone, which was used to restrain the Titan, didn't know where it flew to in the explosion just now. In order to make sure nothing goes wrong, everyone had to search separately. The flying squirrel still doesn't agree with Tony to take the risk, but when he thinks of the tragedy on Ian Island, he doesn't know how to stop him. The contradictory mind made the flying squirrel search for a while, then stopped, sighed, and continued to search. But when it comes to contradictions, the most contradictory person is actually Tony. Fuck, why do I have to come for this thing that might kill me later? Am I sick? In the end, the one who found the Thunderstone was Simon, who had just returned. He first inspected the center of the explosion, then found Loya, asked about his movements at that time, took out paper and pen to write and draw for a long time. In the end, he ran directly under the big rock and took out the Thunderstone. The rest of the people watching are stunned. As expected of a member of the Golden Fox family, this head is a good one. Shanks said with emotion. A few minutes later, Tony twitched the corners of his mouth and looked at the crowd around him dozens of meters away, holding up the source of life. Then, I'll start. Chapter 215 Turn Tony into Light. If you learn rationality and mathematics well, you will not be afraid to travel all over the world. That being said, yes. But Loya can guarantee that no one can understand why the source of life turns into light, even if he recruits the champion of the National College Entrance Examination. Yes, a stone, turned into light. It's so unscientific. A group of people stared blankly at the scene in front of them. The source of life that was just put on Tony's mouth, Tony just opened his mouth, his lips just touched it, and then, the source of life turned into a yuhi-colored light band and got into Tony's mouth. Ah! So that's how you eat. A group of people applauded, indicating that they had learned a lot. Does the documentation say this? The flying squirrel looked at Tony worriedly, looking very nervous. Facing the flying squirrel's question, Shanks blinked blankly. Well, it's the first time I've seen this situation. Why don't we ask? Think of it and do it. Shanks put his hands to his mouth like a trumpet, and shouted loudly at Tony. Hey, Tony boy, what does that smell like? Flying squirrel. Beckman. Who cares about this? Taste. Tony actually smacking his lips. Seems to be reminiscing about something. A little sweet. And, speaking of this, Yuhi's eyes flashed. Okay, spicy, ah. Hold head high. At the end of the voice, Tony's voice had turned into a non-human growl. The harsh sound waves spread outward, and the wind pressure brought by them blew away all the surrounding mud and sand. Oh, is this the beginning? Shanks excitedly looked at Tony, who was gradually covered by Yuhi light. Although I feel a little sorry for causing you such pain, but... Tony, who was roaring up in the sky, gradually cracked into slits, and endless Yuhi light shot out from the slits, like a searchlight, dyeing the blood around Yuhi. Then, the cracks got wider and brighter, and finally exploded with a bang. Click. At this moment, no sound came out, but there was a crisp cracking sound in everyone's ears. Then, in the shocked eyes of everyone, the exploding Tony turned into a mass of Yuhi-colored blood mist that kept squirming, and slowly climbed up into the sky. That cloud of Yuhi-colored smoke was so dazzling and thick, through the smoke, it was impossible to see the scene on the other side of the smoke. The Yuhi-colored smoke that covered the sky was hovering at an altitude of dozens of meters, constantly wriggling and deforming. Boom! At this time, the ground suddenly began to tremble continuously, as if there was a major earthquake, and countless pieces of soil and gravel danced naughty dances in the vibration. Feeling the vibration from the ground, the flying squirrel was stunned. What's the situation now? Can't we be surprised? It's normal. In the vibration, Shanks stretched his feet to maintain his balance, smiled and said to the flying squirrel, "Ghost knows how many things on this island were born from Hook, and now that they have returned to their original bodies, the movement will definitely not be small." Quote. While he was talking, a yuhi-colored shadow pierced the ground like a sharp arrow and flew into the sky. That's bloodworms. Although it kept splitting and dissolving in the air, it soon turned into mist, but the flying squirrel still recognized what it was from the fleeting shadow. And Lord Da, Shanks pointed to a shooting star and shouted, "By the way, why do you call him Lord Da?" "I don't know, this is the nickname that Loya gave him," the flying squirrel said, and quickly turned around to greet the soldiers. "All disperse, pay attention to your feet." Yes. In fact, even without the flying squirrel's reminder, those naval soldiers would pay attention at this moment. After all. Okay, so pretty. Yeah, it's like the pouring rain. Be careful, don't step on it. Looking around, from the entire Ian Island, in all directions, countless yuhi-colored stars shot out from the ground. These stars didn't fly around, and moved straight toward the yuhi-colored mist in the sky. The traces left by the flight are connected together, like yuhi-colored silk threads, weaving a huge cobweb, beautiful and charming. The wound on his body was almost healed, so Loya lifted the exoskeleton and sat on the grass to rest. He raised his head and looked at the huge yuhi-colored smoke in midair. It should be able to survive, Tony. Tony and him, or the elite camp, are an indispensable existence. If he had a choice, he didn't want to see the worst scene. Now he can only pray for Tony, pray that he can survive. At this time, Loya turned his head and looked in the direction of the sea. That's a naval ship. Why is it here? Well, it was probably attracted by the explosion. Loya guessed so, patted his butt, and stood up from the ground. I'd better go pick it up. If it bothers Tony, it will be bad. At the same time as Loya set off, at this moment, Tony, who became a blood mist, also changed. Ian Island didn't know how many tissue cells before Hook were left. The fog that was still hovering on the edge of condensing and disintegrating just a few minutes later could see a clear outline. However, the size of this outline is really amazing. The closest thing to the flying squirrel and the others is naturally Tony's feet. But it was these feet that gave the flying squirrels the feeling that they were so unstoppable. Because just a stubby toe, that length is more than 10 meters long. After the entire sole of the foot is formed, it is like a curtain that covers the sky, separating all the sunlight and casting a large shadow to cover them. The highest in the world. I don't know why, this idea suddenly popped up in the flying squirrel's head. Just 1 foot is so huge, so how terrifying is Tony's entire height now? At this moment, the sound of hasty footsteps awakened the flying squirrel. He turned his head to look, and the officers of the Yuhifa pirates were all facing the enemy, surrounded by Shanks, looking grimly from side to side. What's wrong with them? Flying squirrel thought blankly. Ah! At this moment, a suppressed shout came from the crowd surrounded by Yuhi. The voice flying squirrel is very familiar, it is Shanks. What's the situation? The flying squirrel quickly touched the hilt of the sword and looked around vigilantly. To make the dignified 4 emperors make such a sound, what did he meet? The navy soldiers beside him were also startled by the pain, and followed the flying squirrel to look around. Looking at Yuhi's situation on the pirates' side, the flying squirrel shouted loudly, "Hey! Shanks, what's wrong with you?" With that said, he was about to walk over to see the situation. But, don't come here. The flying squirrel had just taken a step, and the spear of Jesus cloth was aimed at his head. The rest of the cadres also showed their fierceness, as if they were going to attack him in the next moment. If it is an ordinary person, I am afraid that under this kind of battle, I will be scared to the ground. But as a veteran powerhouse, the flying squirrel would not be afraid of them at all. However, this attitude further shows that Shanks is in a very bad situation now. The scream of pain was like a stone hitting the flying squirrel's heart, making his heart tremble. Hey, don't be kidding, Shanks. You are the fourth emperor. As one of the four sovereigns, if Shanks were to die in an unknown attack at this moment, then the Navy would endure the humiliation and bear the arrogance of the Chihuahai, and the balance created would definitely be broken. At that time, it will not be a bloody storm to describe it. Chapter 216 Shanks' Secret. Whoa! The waves carried by the warships slapped the coast continuously, washing the beach repeatedly. A hermit crab who didn't know where to rest was swept up on the beach by the waves, kicking its limbs with its back to the ground, trying to turn itself over. Standing on the slightly cool beach, Loya rubbed his right foot with his left foot, and the soles of his feet were full of wet sand. He rolled the eyes of the dead fish and looked at the large group of people in front of him. I said, "What are you doing?" In front of Loya, a large number of navies pointed their guns at him in unison, as if they were ready to fight. Although I know that communication in the One Piece world is inconvenient, no matter what, the news of myself becoming the 17th Lieutenant General of the headquarters should be spread all over the sea. So what are they doing now? As a group of third-class soldiers and second-class soldiers, when they saw themselves, they did not salute, but instead pointed their guns at themselves. Is this a treason? That would be really interesting. Don't move. Say, what's going on the island? Loya just moved his feet, and the group of Navy put their fingers on the trigger nervously and asked in a stern voice. If it wasn't for the fact that they were all wrapped in gauze, their clothes were dirty, and they looked pitiful, Loya would have roared and taught them how to behave. Calm down, be careful not to get involved. Luoya spread his hands, indicating that he was not malicious. Where's your chief? I want to see him. That's not what you have the final say. A Navy who looked like a captain shouted, greeting left and right, took out Halustone handcuffs and stepped forward to arrest Loya. This can make Luoya look at it for a while. Dare to love, his identity as a lieutenant general is not as good as the recruit t-shirt before. Even the Navy who didn't know him before would know his camp because of his recruit's t-shirt. Now he's a lieutenant general, wearing a suit. No, it's not as good as before without clothes. His clothes had been damaged in the explosion, and a pair of trousers was full of rags. However, as long as the opponent is really the Navy, then this oolong will eventually end. When the two Navy soldiers just walked up to Loya and took out the handcuffs, a bullet shot from a distance, hit the handcuffs, and knocked them out. Who fired the shot? The Navy, like a group of refugees, was like a frightened herd of deer, frantically looking around. Oh, looks like a great sniper has arrived. Loya calmly shifted his gaze, looking at the warship with a thumb-sized outline in the distance. Following his line of sight, the Navy also turned their heads one after another. That's a naval warship. Great, I can finally go back. Don't mess up, show the flag first and tell them there are wounded here. Captain, the lieutenant colonel is still in the cabin. This time, not many people still care about Loya. A group of people were busy doing things, and they couldn't care less about him. It turned out to be attacked. Loya finally understood. And looking at the dilapidated traces of their ship, the attack may have happened for a long time. Even the captain of the warship was seriously injured and did not know if he was alive or dead. But there's no way they haven't met the news bird, right? Loya pondered. So soon, the new warship finally docked, and a slender rear admiral with black hair jumped down. The emerald green flute attached to his waist was penetrated by the flowing air, causing his movements to be accompanied by a strange whimper. When he landed on the beach, the first thing he did was roar with a serious face, "Dare to attack the Vice Admiral of the Navy headquarters. Are you trying to rebel? Arrest them for me in the name of justice." Navy headquarters, Lieutenant Admiral. The group of refugees turned their heads in shock. TF. How is this possible? Just this beggar in front of you. Major General, are you sure you're not kidding me? Sometimes, things just happen to be that way. When you think others are as miserable as refugees, you are just a beggar in the eyes of others. Blah blah blah. Pippi Shrimp, who has been waiting on the coast. No, The ocean shrimp heard the movement here and ran over, and saw its owner at a glance. So, in the sight of everyone's surprise, Loya calmly took the lieutenant general's cloak that symbolized his identity on the back of Pippi Shrimp. Brush. The cloak was draped over his shoulders, and the dragon pattern shone in the sunlight. Then, tell me your origin and purpose. Loya leaned against the huge claws of Pippi Shrimp and looked at them, including the later ones. In the ruins of Ian Island, Tony's evolution has reached a critical moment. There are really too many tissue cells belonging to Hook on this island. Even if many of them cannot move because of the loss of energy supply, even if it is only 1% of them, it is a terrifying astronomical number. Especially the huge number of insect waves, they have more or less tightened tissue in their bodies, which is also an important source of body composition when Tony evolved. When the source of life called, these cells were directly separated from the body, and all poured into Tony's new body, leaving behind the lifeless bugs everywhere. It only took a few minutes to go from being made of dense fog to now glowing in the sun. However, at the moment, the flying squirrel's attention was not on Tony, who was about to complete his evolution. Because not far from him, Shank's situation worries him. Ah! With another suppressed cry of pain, the flying squirrel's eyelids twitched, and he asked, I won't come. But you have to tell me what happened. What the hell happened to Shanks? That's it. Ah, is it a flying squirrel? After the flying squirrel finished speaking, Shanks' hoarse voice came from behind a group of cadres. I'm fine, it just hurts a bit. So, what's the matter? Is it something to do with Tony? What are you hiding? Flying Squirrel asked anxiously. What is going on now is not only about Tony's life and death, but also about the stability of the new world. He can't tolerate his carelessness. Hearing the flying squirrel, Shanks fell into silence over there. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, Okay, Beckman, let's go. But the captain. Beckman said eagerly, your current state. Get out of the way. Before Beckman could finish speaking, Shanks interrupted him with a low growl. It's something they have a right to know. Looking at Shanks' dry and gray eyes, Beckman took a deep breath and stepped aside. Yes, Captain. After Beckman stood away, the flying skier finally saw Shanks surrounded by the crowd. If it weren't for the decades of friendship that made him very familiar with Shanks, the flying squirrel would never equate the skeleton in front of him with the dignified four emperors. It was one, not skinny and skinny, but really only skin and bones. From the 3 scratches on the dry skin at the corner of the left eye, we can know that this thing is indeed the former Shanks. At this moment, Shanks was like a gossamer and was extremely weak. Even the act of raising his head seemed to take all his strength. This is... Suddenly, the flying squirrel saw Shanks' right hand, and his eyes widened in shock. Right hand. Etc. Didn't Shanks' right hand stay in the East China Sea a few years ago? Why now? Suddenly, Flying Squirrel raised his head and looked at Shanks, a little bit of understanding. He looked at the withered body seriously and asked, Shanks, you also have bloodworms? Hearing the Flying Squirrel's question, Shanks' dry face twitched and replied, It's not parasitic, it's another way of using bloodworms. Let me tell you, Captain. Beckman stopped Shanks from continuing. In response, Shanks gave him a deep look and nodded. For him, even just talking now is very laborious. Chapter 217 Thanks for treatment. Indeed, although Shanks after the broken arm can still stand in the position of the 4 emperors. But everyone knows that after losing an arm, Shanks is no longer the monster he used to be, and his strength has dropped by at least 3 layers. The incident of the broken arm, especially on his swordsmanship, had a huge impact. This can be seen from Hawkeye Mahawk's unwillingness to fight with him again. A swordsman, holding a sword with both hands, the slashing power is far beyond what can be compared with one hand. Unless he has Kirin arm. But obviously, Shanks doesn't have that bug. He doesn't even have a Kirin tattoo on his hand. Originally, neither Shanks nor his crew felt regretful about betting on Luffy with one arm and betting on the new era. However, people are in the arena and cannot help themselves. When the news of Shanks' broken arm came back to the New World, a large group of vulture-like pirates set their sights on the heavily injured Four Emperors. Just like Luffy and their extremely evil generation, in the original book, the position of the Four Emperors, in any era, there are countless people who want to challenge it. Yuhifa pirates, life suddenly became busy. The main cadres went to war everywhere to deal with the guys who came to their territory to make trouble. But such a day is not ahead after all. Even though Shanks still showed unmatched absolute strength, looking at the Four Emperors, the pirates still felt that he was the weakest one. So, after Shanks and others knew about the Titan information, at the suggestion of everyone, he decided to give it a try. Grow your arms back with the power of the Titans. However, the way you looked before. Flying Squirrel frowned, staring at Shanks' dry left hand. Did you fail in the end? Yes. Beckman sighed, and there was lingering melancholy between his brows. It is true that the captain made his left hand grow again, but the price is that all the nutrients and energy of his body will be plundered to the left hand. The consequences of this situation are what you see now. Quote, because this process can be controlled by one's own will, the captain usually does not dare to let his left hand grow out. But, Beckman took a breath, and said in a more serious tone, even if the left hand is not allowed to grow, the monster is still absorbing nutrients all the time, and even taking the supply of other parts without limit. What if the left hand grows again? Now, he can kill even a child with a dagger. Beckman summed up with a sullen face. Well, it's not that serious. Shanks interrupted Beckman with a wry smile. I still have some confidence in dealing with children. Is this an honorable thing for him? The flying squirrel looked at him speechlessly. So, you're going to turn Tony into a Titan, so that the Titan tissue in your body will break free? Yes. Beckman nodded. Although it is not the same Titan, it cannot be directly atomized away from the body like other bloodworms on the island. However, the Titan does not have the concept of living in harmony. Tony's changes have given it the idea of competition. Now, Beckman said, looking up at the huge figure in the sky. Now, as long as that kid succeeds, the bloodworms in the captain's body will leave his body, and then the captain will be fine as long as it is treated. Is this another application you're talking about? The flying squirrel looked at Shanks, but he knew that the parasite of blood myeloid parasites was in the spinal cord. Since Shanks dared to do this, it meant the worms in his body. Not parasitic in that dangerous location. In response, Shanks nodded solemnly. It's fluid now, and it's distributed throughout my bloodstream, and there may be a lot of blood loss when it comes off, but it shouldn't be a problem. Sorry for hiding the truth from you. I know that becoming a Titan is a very dangerous and painful process, so I'm really sorry. Facing Shanks' calmness, the flying squirrel remained silent. After a long time, he raised his head and looked at Shanks. His eyes were full of contradictions and struggles. You must live, Shanks. Even if we'll sacrifice Tony. But the flying squirrel's voice suddenly became cold. At that time, flying squirrel, I swear here, I will definitely take your head in the future. The flying squirrel's words can be said to be merciless, but the people of Yuhi's pirates were not angry because of the provocation. They know that this is the inevitable outcome. No, I believe that kid. You should too. While the flying squirrel was talking to Shanks and others, at this moment, Tony in the sky suddenly opened his eyes. At the same time he opened his mouth wide and let out a deafening roar. Aang! The huge roar resounded through the sea, and the terrifying sound waves rolled up the wind pressure and spread out from Ian Island, forming a circle of huge waves around the island. Success! Flying Squirrel looked back in surprise, but saw a big foot that was falling very fast, and his face suddenly turned black. All escape! Flying Squirrel shouted anxiously. If this time was stepped on, few of them would be able to survive. Fuck! Take the captain with you. At this moment, whether it was the Navy or the pirates, they all made concerted efforts to flee in embarrassment. Soon, Tony, who transformed into Ultraman, stepped on the ground, and the entire Ian Island seemed to sink. Boom. After the roar, the movement this time was not small at all. Loya, who stepped on the ground, was directly vibrated and bounced a dozen centimeters before falling back to the ground. Major General Alex, who was reporting the situation to him, managed to stand firm and looked at the direction of the center of the island with a bit of confusion. Speaking of which, Lieutenant General Loya, the giant fell down. Ah, I know. Loya frowned and glanced over there, then turned his head, but someone will deal with it. What did you just say? What is Uzumaki? No matter what Tony becomes, Loya believes that Shanks can handle it. But at this moment, he didn't know that Shanks was a weak chicken now, and he had to be carried on his back even when he moved. Ah, it's a sea cave. Although he always felt that something was wrong, Alex was not qualified to deny Loya's decision, so he had to continue to report the situation. As he spoke, he pointed to the middle-aged man who was being treated by his subordinates. It is really thanks to the efforts of Lieutenant Colonel Dato that he was able to escape from that kind of natural danger. The sea cave is not a natural phenomenon, but a landform. Just like the sea navel that Luffy and the others met, it is a special cave hidden below the sea level. This kind of cave is generally hidden deep in the seabed, ranging from 10 meters to several hundred meters from the sea surface. One can imagine how much effort this guy named Dato had put in, and how lucky he was. It is simply the possession of the European Emperor. Loya thought so. Tony stood on the ground and stopped moving after that roar just now. Yuhi's light-filled eyes opened, staring at the ground, wondering if he could see clearly or not. After recovering from the shock just now, the flying skier raised his head and looked at Shanks. What's the situation now? During the shaking just now, Shanks ate a few mouthfuls of ashes, and it took a long time for him to recover. Hearing the flying squirrel's question, he felt the blood worms in his body becoming more and more excited, and replied. He succeeded. I just don't know if he's sensible now. At this time, as if he felt something, Tony, who had been still, slowly lowered his head, and his two huge arms clapped in front of his chest. Thanks for the hospitality. Chapter 218 Shanks' Apology. Thank you for the hospitality. Co-author, you also remembered the sentence I said before evolution. I started it clearly, right? A group of people looked at Tony the Giant in the paws in a daze, saying that they couldn't keep up with the rhythm. Now, however, is not the time to grapple with this trivial issue. Flying Squirrel shouted to Yuhifa pirates. Shanks, how are you? Shanks, who was surrounded by the Yuhifa pirates, was sweating profusely at the moment, and a stream of gray and blue swirled around on his face and hands, as if something was shuttled under his skin. Come on. Just as he was about to say something, Shanks suddenly bit Kiba and roared, and his left hand suddenly began to wriggle and twist, like a big boa constrictor. At the same time, the same withered arm of Ben and the body swelled and deformed rapidly. From the skinny appearance, it turned into a strong arm of a muscular man in a blink of an eye, which was in stark contrast to Shanks' withered body. When he shouted this sentence, Beckman on the side was already prepared, holding the dagger, aligning Shanks' left shoulder, and slashing with the knife. Puff! The sharp blade entered the body. No matter whether it was muscle or bone, it did not stop the dagger for a minute and a second. Almost a second after the sound came out, the thick arm fell to the ground. After that, Jesus B.U. and others rushed up with bandages and medicine, busy bandaging Shanks' wound, while Beckman rushed up and kicked the broken arm that was constantly wriggling and deformed, and scolded. Go away, monsters. Stay farther from my boat. Yeah. Accompanied by a harsh roar, from the broken arm, several granulation buds broke through the skin and stretched into the air. The broken open mouth was full of tiny sharp teeth, circling into the depths in circles. Tony, get rid of this thing. Although he couldn't keep up with the rhythm, the flying squirrel still tried to shout at Tony loudly. Judging from Tony's performance just now, although he is a little abnormal now, it may be because he is hot. But one thing is certain, if he loses his mind, he will never make such humane actions as before. Solved. Thankfully, Tony really doesn't seem to have lost his mind. He spoke very slowly, like a rusty machine, creaking slowly. But the obvious thoughtful look on his face couldn't be deceived. I get it. Suddenly, Tony shouted in shock, causing a group of people on the ground to tremble. Then, in the eyes of Flying Squirrel and the others, Tony raised his arm straight and slammed down on the broken arm that kept roaring and roaring on the ground. Yes, an arm that was hundreds of meters long smashed straight down on the ground. That scene was simply overwhelming. This will solve the problem. You use interrogative sentences for this sentence, you bastard. The Flying Squirrel was full of black lines, roaring in his heart. Run. Take the wounded and go first. Road, hurry up, take the captain on your back. For a time, the crowd below jumped up again. Can't this bastard think about his size? Beckman supported Shanks, who was gradually recovering his strength, while running wildly with Lajaloo. I think his head is a little hard to use now. Because of the skill of shaving, after the Flying Squirrel helped the soldiers leave, there was still time to pass by Beckman and others to complain. Fortunately, none of those present were weak. Even those ordinary soldiers were carefully selected elites. Before Tony's huge iron fist fell, everyone fled the place. Then, boom. Fly up. Alex calmly looked at Loya, who was shaken in the air with him, and asked, Lord Loya, what is the situation now? Calm down, it's just the aftermath of the battle over there. Hey, is this new Lieutenant General reliable? Why do I feel a little overwhelmed? Alex has always been scolded by Flying Squirrels as an unreliable man, but compared with Loya at the moment, Alex feels that he is wronged. Ah, it's going to fall. Get down. Nope. Hold your head. Who is that? Help catch me. Unlike the two calm generals, the rest of the Navy would not have the ability to maintain balance. Those with weak constitutions vomited a mouthful of blood at the moment of the shock, fell into a coma, and fell straight into the beach like a green onion, forming a beautiful landscape. After a while, the smart Navy found the safest place. That's on a warship. Although the chest will still feel tight, but it is much better than being on land. The smoke brought by the vibration lasted for a long time before disappearing, and when the smoke dissipated, everyone could not help but swallow. Gollum. After the punch, a man stared blankly at the deep hole left on the spot. The pit is so big that it is no less than the teunking left by the hook explosion. Well, Ian Island can be renamed Teunking Island in the future. Boom. Tony raised his fist slowly, and the sticky gravel and dirt kept falling from it, just like the dirt raining from the sky. After patting the dirt off his hands, Tony glanced at the large pool of blood on his fist and said happily. It's solved. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Dong 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 dong. Ultraman who got excited again for some reason. No, Tony. At this moment, he was like a gorilla, beating his chest with his fist and bursting into cheers. On the ground, Shanks, who had already bandaged the wound, scratched the back of his head embarrassedly, and said to the flying skier, that if he has always been this IQ in the future, wouldn't you be looking for me desperately? What do you think? The Flying Squirrel tip Kiba roared. At this time, Tony, who everyone thought would continue to vent, slammed. The UV light in his eyes quickly receded, and cracks crawled all over his body again. The dazzling blood-colored light told Flying Squirrel that he was about to explode again. What is this time? Flying Squirrel looked bitter. He looked around, not knowing what to do this time. But at this moment, Shanks smiled happily. Okay, it worked. This is the proof that he has successfully inherited the power of the Titans. Only by controlling the deformation at will, can he be truly successful. So, he's changing back now? Flying Squirrel asked, but even with Shanks' assurance, he was still not at ease. But beyond the Flying Squirrel's expectations, this time Tony didn't explode as directly as before. Instead, he started slowly evaporating. Flying Squirrel can only use this adjective to describe the scene he sees. A large amount of yuhi-colored mist continued to emanate from Tony, making a hissing sound. Even if they are far apart, they can feel the scorching airflow in the air. At the same time, with the appearance of steam, Tony's body gradually disappeared. If an ice cube bastard with a small stomach is here, he will definitely swear when he sees this scene. Fuck. Attack on Titan. Waiting for the hot steam to dissipate, a strong male shadow appeared in front of everyone. Tony was naked at the moment, and the lines of yuhi color were intertwined, like blood vessels all over his body. PFF'd. Seemingly very weak, Tony, who turned back, stumbled to one knee and fell to the ground. Tony. Flying Squirrel rushed forward in a hurry, trying to help him up. However, when he touched the tattoo on the other party's body, he immediately retracted his hand. At this time, Tony slowly raised his head and showed a sunny smile at the Flying Squirrel. It's all right, Master Flying Squirrel. I did it. Huh. The rest of the people finally confirmed with their own ears that Tony was okay, and they all breathed a long sigh of relief. Then, Shanks had the strength to stand up at this moment. With Beckman's support, he walked to Tony's side and bowed solemnly to salute. Thank you so much, Tony. Chapter 219 Tony leaves. Lord Loya, the giant seems to be gone. Alex is a little stunned, and has already expressed 12 points of speechlessness about the current situation. Calm, it's normal. Loya replied. But this sentence made Alex even more confused. So, what has been the situation since the beginning? Didn't I come to this island to meet the two lieutenant generals? So what am I doing now? Watching an open-air magic show. All right, Alex. Loya clapped his hands to attract Alex's attention, then pointed to Lieutenant Colonel Dato and the others. Now you should pay more attention to them, and you should inform G9 as they're a branch. You can't take so many people on a single ship. Yes. I'll do it right away. What Loya said is indeed the truth. Lieutenant Colonel Dato and their warships were attacked by pirates first, and then accidentally fell into the sea cave when they escaped. The damage they suffered was not small at all. It is already a blessing to be able to insist on sailing to Ian Island. As for returning to Malenford, which is more than a month away from here, no one wants to take this risk. Watching Alex walk away, Loya's expression did not change, but he was relieved. He spent most of the day dawdling with this Alex here, just to prevent him from getting close to the center of the island. In addition to the reason that Tony is about to inherit the power of the Titans and cannot be disturbed, the more important reason is still on Shanks and others. That is the 4 Emperor Shanks. The ghost knows which faction this Alex is from, even if the other party is a former subordinate of the Flying Squirrel. If the other party is the mad dog from Akainu's side, wouldn't the Flying Squirrel and Loya be embarrassed? The dignified Lieutenant General of the Navy headquarters, stomping his feet. Except for the New World, the other big men who are shaking 3 times in the world actually have friendship with Yuhi Fashanks, one of the 4 emperors. Isn't this just giving an excuse to make trouble for others? Even if Luoya was not afraid, he would have to think about the old Flying Squirrel. He has spent most of his life fighting and killing pirates. He has suffered countless injuries and made countless meritorious deeds. The honors he has won have made countless navies ashamed. It would be really pitiful to be thrown into such a pot of sewage at the end of the old age, and end up with no guarantee at the end of the festival. At this moment, the sound of a phone bug interrupted his thoughts. Blue blue, blue blue. Loya turned left and right on his body to look for it, and finally found a vibrating phone bug behind his belt. This is the communication tool that the Flying Squirrel gave him. The phone bug he had given to him by Zephyr was sent back to the warship and given to a special person for treatment. After everyone returned to the headquarters, it was sent to the maintenance station. The telephone bug used by the Lieutenant General is a special breed with excellent confidentiality and communication distance. Even if these phone bugs are dead, they cannot leave their bodies behind, they must all be brought back to the headquarters. Loya has nothing to say about this. On Earth, high-end technology monopoly, nuclear nonproliferation, etc., he has long been used to it. Taking out a new phone bug, Loya picked up the receiver and said, "Mosamoxi, I'm Loya, who are you looking for?" Flying Squirrel took a deep breath. "Bastard. Are you blind? Can you take a look first when you answer the phone next time?" "Ah, this habit is hard to change." Loya rolled the eyes of the dead fish, calmly moved the receiver away from his ears, and waited for the flying squirrel to roar over. Then, he took out his ears, glanced at the bright purple hair on the phone bug's head, and said, "Oh, it turned out to be Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. What's the matter? I saw Tony disappeared. Did he succeed?" After venting his anger, the flying squirrel felt much better. Hearing this, he calmly said, "Almost, but it takes a long time to store energy after each transformation," Shanks said. "Wait a minute," Loya interrupted the flying squirrel, looked at Alex not far away vigilantly, and then walked a little farther and leaned against the tree trunk, and then spoke again. "Okay, you talk." "Well, according to Shanks, the current Tony has only acquired the ability to become a Titan for a short time, and he can't use all the power of the source of life. On the premise of maintaining his IQ, he can become a 50-meter-tall Titan. That's his current limit." "Well, that's it, then. Wait a minute, what does it mean to keep your IQ?" Loya looked stunned. Didn't he hear that the transformation also lowered his IQ? Shouldn't it be to stay sane? While Loya talks to the flying squirrel, Alex puts the flute to his ear and listens. Suddenly, a strange smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and he muttered to himself, "So, is this the current situation on the island? My opinion is, let Tony stay in the New World." After the call, Shanks said to the flying squirrel who was returning the phone bug, "Because most of the blood medullary worms released by the BB family are in the New World, Tony's here to find more bugs. As for his safety..." He looked around at his crew, and after they nodded in agreement, he said solemnly, "Please leave it to me, because I still owe him a life." After listening to this, the flying squirrel looked at Shanks blankly. "Give the Navy to the pirates." If the person who spoke was not Shanks, the flying skier would definitely slap his disgust on his face. However, the problem is actually here. Before that, the main reason why the flying squirrel agreed to let Tony inherit the power of the Titan was to clean up the bloodworm. But here comes the problem: if Tony and them go back to headquarters, then being stuck in the middle of the Great Route, which is arguably the safest place, won't make much sense. I also knew that the BB family would not be so stupid to let the blood marrow worms run to the vicinity of the naval headquarters. Then it's not an experiment. That's called death. However, Tony's current identity is after all a Navy, or a member of the elite battalion, staying with Yuhifa and others. The criticism and hostility he will endure can be imagined. And not only him, the flying squirrel, Loya, Shanks, will be involved in the storm. After listening to Shanks' words, the flying squirrel turned to look at Tony, who was still hot. "Tony, what are you thinking?" In the end is to follow the flying squirrel back, or stay in the New World with Shanks. This is a difficult question to decide. Well, as for why not stay in the G9 branch. In other words, no matter how stupid the BB family is, they wouldn't leave blood marrow worms in the windless belt, right? In other words, how should they bring the blood marrow worms to Wufang? Yes, the G9 branch is located in the windless belt, and is the only naval branch in the windless belt. Only the Navy has the confidence to set up bases in the windless belt. After listening to the two of them, Tony quietly stared at the Yuhi-colored lines on his hands. After a long time, he looked up at the flying squirrel. "Lord Flying Squirrel, please forgive my willfulness. I see." Before Tony could finish, the flying squirrel cut him off. Looking at Tony in front of him, the flying squirrel looked very complicated. "I know what you're up to, Tony. But you have to remember that you only have 1 year. After a year, if you don't come back." Speaking of which, the flying squirrel silently touched the hilt of the sword. you also know that it will happen at that time. What? Ah, I see, Lord Flying Squirrel. Tony was not in high spirits, and his tone was sullen. Well, don't talk about that now. Shanks suddenly rubbed over, grabbed the flying squirrel's shoulder, paused when he was about to go to grab Tony, withdrew his hand, and pretended that nothing happened. The flying squirrel said, "We are the heroes who saved the world. It's banquet time. Come, let's play together. Beckman, go and bring all the ingredients from the ship. It's a banquet." In other words, if you invite the Navy to a banquet, in this world, in addition to Luffy, Shanks did it, right? Chapter 220 The Dust Settles. In the end, the flying squirrel, of course, did not agree to attend Shanks' banquet. He was angry when he saw him now, but he couldn't say why. Blame Tony for leaving? No, that was his own choice. Blame Simon and others for being detained. If it was other pirates, they would have been killed long ago. So, isn't this the legendary awkwardness? Anyway, after waiting for Tony's body temperature to return to normal and completely fine, the flying squirrel patted his butt and stood up, saying goodbye and leaving. Tony silently watched the torn flying squirrel lead Simon and the others away, swearing in his heart, "I will definitely be back." Shanks had already drank a large glass of wine before the banquet started, and now he brought the second glass to Tony's side. "Yo, what's the matter, are you a little reluctant?" Hiccup. The pungent smell of alcohol hit his face, causing Tony to take a step back in disgust. "Nothing to give up," Tony replied. "When I accepted this power, I was already mentally prepared to leave. Because, this power is not under my control at all." "Oh, you don't look stupid." Shanks looked at Tony with a strange expression, as if surprised that he had such a decisive will. In this regard, Tony glanced at him sideways and said, "After all, I don't like drinking. Drinking too much alcohol will lower your IQ." "Ha ha ha ha, what a bullshit." Shanks laughed exaggeratedly. "Someone even told me that the sword was unstable after drinking too much. Then look at me now, it's not the same as the 4 emperors." At this point, Shanks suddenly turned gloomy. "Cut. It's a pity, that bastard with Hawkeye won't fight me after my hand is broken. What's the use of holding it firmly?" As a top-level swordsman, like Hawkeye, Shanks is also very eager for an opponent. "I'll fight you," Tony said without thinking, but as soon as he said it, he felt reckless. "Who is the other party?" "Yuhi Hair Shanks. 4 emperors. One of the top powerhouses in the sea." "And what about yourself?" "It's just a small character who got the power to transform into a titan by chance, and is so humble and insignificant in front of Shanks." Shanks was also stunned by Tony's words, but soon, his expression became vivid again. "Ha ha ha, interesting, ha 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 ha, it's so interesting." Just as Tony was being greeted by Shanks' smiling face to Yuhi, the other party suddenly stopped laughing and shoved the wine glass into his hand. "Want to fight me? You can. Finish this glass of wine first." "Good." Shanks is the top swordsman in this world. It is self-evident that being able to fight against him will help improve his swordsmanship. This is a godsend opportunity. After Tony shouted, he grabbed the wine glass Shanks used, raised his head and gulped it down. One breath. Yes, that's it. "Oh, are you back at last?" On the beach, Loya, Alex and the others sat around the bonfire and roasted food. Hearing Loya's words, Alex was stunned for a moment, then followed Loya's gaze back. After waiting for a few more seconds, he felt the breath of the flying squirrel and others from the wind. If you look at it with your eyes, the flying squirrel and others can only see a few shadows as small as an embroidery needle. This surprised Alex, and he couldn't help but be shocked by Loya's strength. Observation hockey. No, it's unrealistic to perceive such a long distance. And I don't feel the fluctuation of his domineering use at all. Alex turned the flute in his hand, thinking, extraordinary first 6 senses, or a way of perception that I don't know about. Of course, the perception range of Loya's enemy of creatures is not that large. He can detect the approach of flying squirrels from such a long distance, relying on smell. The dragon's body made his senses extremely sharp, no less than a true beast. Just as a gust of east wind blew, he immediately smelled the stench of sweat and blood emanating from a large group of people over there. After the two generals found the flying squirrel and others, they waited for more than half an hour before the two sides finally officially met. What's the situation? We were attacked. At a glance, the flying skier saw the wounded all around. But then he reacted, these people should have landed on Ian Island after them, and the hundreds of people they brought this time are all behind him. Long time no see, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. As soon as he saw the flying squirrel, Alex stood up just like a mouse saw a cat. That straight military posture made Loya feel ashamed. Even when he was a recruit, he had never been so serious. Oh, Alex. Flying Squirrel then remembered that in the previous call, Loya had told him the situation here. You bastard, I heard you did a good job in the G9 branch. The flying squirrel stepped up, patted Alex's shoulder hard, and said with relief, the conditions there are so difficult, it's been a lot of hard work for you all these years. I'll ask Sengoku to check your military exploits and try to bring you back. Thank you, Mr. Flying Squirrel. But for justice, I am not afraid of suffering. Alex, let's call it righteous words. However, his small movement of twirling the flute on his back paused for a while, which proved that he was actually not as upright as he appeared to be. Cough, let's talk about the old things later. Loya coughed twice, attracting the flying squirrel's attention. Then, he looked at Simon and the others and asked, tell me, what's the matter with you? Well, almost forgot about it. Facing Loya's smile with a hidden knife, no mistake, Simon and the others swallowed hard. If I say, we don't know what happened, do you believe it? Hearing this answer, Loya was speechless for a long time. If I say that I can't kill you with one punch, do you believe it? Don't say such horrible things casually. I'm timid and you don't know. But it was indeed Loya who misunderstood them. In fact, when Simon and Ming were about to escape the bloodworm sneak attack, the coast was suddenly filled with a paralyzing gas. Simon and others who were caught off guard were all hit without a trace of defense. Later, Shanks and others rushed to Ian Island and rescued Simon, who was almost eaten by the bloodworms as food. As for why Shanks didn't tell Loya the truth at first, this problem can only be attributed to the bad taste of an unreliable captain. He wanted to see, facing himself, what kind of choices this rookie in the Navy who recently stirred up the sea would make. Of course, everyone saw the result. It's all just a coincidence. After Loya taught Simon and others a lesson one by one, the flying squirrel spoke slowly to attract the little firepower that Loya had left. Well, it's good for people to come back, so don't be too harsh on them. Hearing this, Roha did not fight back, contrary to what the flying squirrel expected, but raised his chin and thought about something seriously. After a while, he raised his head strangely and looked at Simon. Speaking of which, what is the purpose of your following this time? The incident has been resolved without doing anything. Then, Loya pouted strangely, and added in a wretched tone, tisk tisk. Sure enough, they are all a group of cannon fodder. No, the cheeky follower is also Smack-chan. Simon. I have a sentence. MMP does not know what to say or not to say.